Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was standing at the edge of the lake when the light shut off. That's the cleanest way to say it. 1 second it was there, hovering low over the water like someone had suspended a flare and forgotten about it, and the next second it was just gone. No fade, no movement. It didn't shoot upward or sink. It was just there, and then it wasn't. It was late, close to 11. Early fall. The air had that cold, damp smell it gets near water once the sun's been down a while. I live outside a small town in northern Minnesota, and the lake sits behind my place, down a short slope through some birch and scrub pine. It's not big. Locals fish it. Kids skate on it in winter. There's a dirt access road on the far side and nothing else. I hadn't gone out there looking for anything weird. I was taking trash out to the burn barrel and noticed the glow through the trees. At first I thought someone was night fishing with a lantern. Then I realized the light wasn't attached to anything. It was too steady, too round. Pale white, almost bluish, reflecting cleanly off the water without ripples. I watched it for maybe a minute, long enough to notice it didn't make a sound, long enough to feel stupid standing there with a garbage bag in my hand, heart beating faster for no good reason. When it vanished, the woods felt louder. Crickets, water movement, distant road noise. I waited, expecting it to come back, but nothing happened. After another minute, I went back inside, locked the door, and stood in my kitchen, staring out the window like something might be staring back. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I kept replaying it, trying to convince myself it was a drone or a boat light or something normal. By afternoon, that explanation didn't sit right anymore. So I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line. I told the woman who answered that I'd seen an unusual light over the lake behind my house. I gave my name, address, and said I wasn't claiming anything crazy, just that it seemed off. She asked which lake. Clearwater, I said. She repeated it back correctly, asked a couple more questions, and said they'd note it. That was it. No visit. No follow-up call. I figured that was the end of it. 3 days later, around 10 in the morning, someone knocked on my door. It was a weekday. I worked nights, so I was still half asleep. I pulled on a hoodie and looked through the peephole. 2 men stood on my porch. Both were wearing dark jackets that didn't look like uniforms. Not identical, but close enough that I noticed. Black pants, plain shoes, no visible logos. I opened the door partway. "Mr. Halverson?" the taller one said. He had dark hair combed flat and a face that looked unfinished somehow, like the features were all there but arranged without much thought. "Yeah," I said. "Who are you?" "We're with the government," the shorter one said quickly, smiling. He had a rounder face, light hair, and eyes that didn't settle on anything. "Just following up on a report you made." He didn't specify which government. I waited for a badge or ID. Neither of them offered one. "About the lake," the tall one added. I nodded slowly. "Okay." They both looked past me, into the house. "Can we come in?" the shorter one asked. I hesitated, then I stepped aside. I don't know why. They didn't feel threatening exactly, just out of place. They didn't take off their jackets. They stood in my living room like they were waiting for a bus. The tall one asked me to describe what I saw. I told it the same way I had on the phone, light over the water, no sound, gone suddenly. He nodded at points I hadn't emphasized. "Approximately 11 p.m., he said, "Yes." "Clear weather," the shorter one added. "No wind." I frowned. There was a breeze. They both paused. The tall one made a note on a small pad. I hadn't seen him pull it out. "You didn't mention anyone else being present," he said. "No one was." "And you did not take photographs," the shorter one said. "No." They exchanged a look that felt rehearsed. The shorter man smiled again. "Good." I asked how they knew about the breeze thing, or about the time. I knew I'd said evening, not 11 exactly. The tall one said, "You're mistaken." I didn't argue. Instead, I asked how they got there. They said they'd driven. I asked where they parked. There's only one gravel pull-off near my house, and I hadn't heard a car. The shorter one pointed vaguely toward the road. "Down there." They kept saying the lake's name wrong after that. Not dramatically wrong, just enough. Clear water. 2 words, emphasis on the second. Everyone around here says it fast, like one word, and the stress is on the first part. I corrected them once. They apologized. Then did it again. The tall one asked if I'd experienced anything unusual since. I said no. He asked if I'd told anyone else about the light. I said no. That's good, the shorter one said again, nodding too much. They told me there was nothing out of the ordinary in the area. No aircraft activity, no experiments, no reason for concern. They said reflections over water can be deceptive. While they talked, I noticed something off about their shoes. They were clean. Not just clean, but untouched. No dust, no wear. My floor wasn't spotless. They left no marks. The conversation felt like it looped. Same reassurances, slightly reworded, same questions. The tall one kept checking his watch, though I never heard it tick. Finally, the shorter one said, "Well, that should do it." They both turned toward the door without waiting for me to respond. I watched them step onto the porch. I followed, mostly because I wanted to see the car. They walked down the steps, side by side, then continued straight off the path and into the yard. Not toward the road, toward the trees. "Hey," I said. They didn't turn around. They just kept walking. Jackets dark against the birch trunks until the trees swallowed them. No engine sound, no doors. Nothing. I stood there longer than I want to admit. Later, I walked down to the lake. The water looked normal. Wind pushed small ripples across the surface. No lights, no reflections, just clear water, sitting there like it always had. I noticed him the first time because he was sitting in the wrong place. I worked the front desk at a small outpatient clinic in Mesa, Arizona. Nothing dramatic. Beige walls, bad art, the smell of disinfectant, and burnt coffee. Patients checked in, sat down, stared at their phones, got called back. The lobby had a very obvious flow to it. If you were waiting, you sat facing the TV or the windows. The chairs by the elevator were technically for overflow, but no one ever used them unless the place was packed. It was around 8:15 in the morning, already hot outside, that dry desert heat that felt wrong before noon. I was logging someone into the system when I looked up and saw a man sitting in one of the elevator chairs. Just one chair pulled slightly away from the others, angled so he could see straight down the hall. He wasn't looking at the TV. He wasn't on his phone. He was watching the elevator doors. I remember thinking maybe he was early for an appointment upstairs. That happened sometimes, but usually people hovered near the call button or stood. They didn't sit like they were settling in for a long wait. He looked normal enough at a glance, mid-30s maybe. Dark hair cut short, clean-shaven, plain gray button-up shirt, dark pants, no jacket, no bag. His hands were folded loosely in his lap. After a few minutes, it started to bother me that he hadn't checked in. We had a sign-in tablet right on the counter. Big and obvious. People missed it sometimes, but not for that long. I finished with the patient in front of me and called out, "Sir, if you're here for an appointment, you'll need to sign in." He didn't react. Not even a flicker. Didn't turn his head. Didn't shift. Nothing. Just kept staring at the elevator doors like he was waiting for them to open on their own. I thought maybe he had headphones in, but I couldn't see any. I tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. That's when I really looked at him. His eyes were open, but not focused on anything specific. They tracked the elevator panel when the light above it flicked on for another floor, then went back to the seam between the doors. A patient came out of the elevator then, and the doors opened right in front of him. He leaned back slightly to give them space, but didn't look at the person. The doors closed again, and he leaned forward to his original position. I didn't push it. I told myself he was waiting for someone. Or maybe he was confused. We got a lot of confused people. Around 9:30, he stood up and walked out. I didn't see him sign out. I didn't hear the door. 1 second he was there, the next time I glanced over, the chair was empty. The second day, he was there when I arrived. Same chair, same posture, same clothes. It was 7:55 a.m. The lobby had just opened. Third grass, no patients yet, just me, the cleaning crew finishing up, and him. I stopped just inside the door and stood there longer than I should have, watching him. He was already staring at the elevator. I asked the cleaner, Rosa, if she'd seen him come in. She frowned and said, "Who?" I pointed. She looked where I was pointing and then back at me. "Girl," she said quietly, "there's no one there." I looked again. He was still there, still watching. I laughed it off, embarrassed, and said, "Never mind." Rosa left a few minutes later, shaking her head like I was messing with her. I watched him for most of the morning. He never moved except to adjust slightly when the elevator opened. Never checked his phone. Never spoke. Never signed in. At one point, a kid started crying in the lobby, loud and sudden. Everyone jumped. He didn't. I finally called security around 10. Just asked them to send someone to check on a guy who might be lost or having a medical issue. While I was on the phone, I glanced over again. The chair was empty. Security came anyway, walked the lobby, checked the bathrooms, shrugged, asked for a description. When I described him, the guard frowned and said no one matching that had come through. The third day, I told myself I wouldn't look. I failed about 30 seconds after sitting down. He was back. Same spot. Same clothes. Same stillness. This time, the air conditioning felt too loud. Every sound felt like it echoed. I couldn't stop thinking about Rosa not seeing him, or how security hadn't seen him leave. I didn't call out to him. I didn't call security. I just watched. Around noon, one of the nurses, Kyle, came up to the desk and followed my gaze. "You keep staring at that chair," he said. "Do you see him?" I asked. "See who?" My stomach dropped. I didn't answer. I just shook my head. He left again sometime in the afternoon. I didn't notice him go. I just realized at some point that the chair was empty. That night, I asked our office manager if we could pull the lobby cameras. I said a patient had complained about someone making them uncomfortable. She agreed. We sat in her office after closing, the desert sky outside already dark and cooling fast. We scrubbed through 3 days of footage. The lobby was empty every morning until patients arrived. The chairs by the elevator were always empty. No man, no movement, no sign of anyone sitting there. On the third day's footage, I watched myself stare at an empty chair for hours. I didn't come in the next day. I called out sick and stayed home, curtains drawn, trying not to picture that chair. When I went back the day after that, the chairs by the elevator were gone. Facilities said they'd been removed months ago. No one remembered them being there at all. The elevator still opened and closed. I stopped watching it. They knocked at 11:47 p.m., right when the house had settled into that quiet stretch where every sound felt louder than it should. It was raining, not hard, just steady enough to make the streetlights blur. I'd been on the couch with the TV muted, scrolling on my phone, half asleep. The knock wasn't aggressive. 3 firm taps. Patient, like they knew I was awake. I didn't answer at first. Nobody ever came that late in my neighborhood unless something was wrong. I live in a split level in a quiet part of Fort Collins. Cul-de-sac, mostly families and retirees. The kind of place where the loudest thing after 10 is usually someone's garage door. The knock came again. Same rhythm. I stood up and went to the door, stopping short to look through the sidelight. 2 men stood on the porch, close enough that they were almost touching the door. Both wore dark coats that looked too thin for the weather. No umbrellas, no hoods. The rain didn't seem to bother them. I opened the door a few inches, chain still on. "Can I help you?" The taller one spoke first. He had a narrow face and hair parted so neatly it looked painted on. "Evening, sir. We're here about a noise complaint." "A noise complaint?" I said. "Now?" "Yes," he said, like the timing made perfect sense. The other man smiled. He was shorter, heavier, with a soft face that didn't quite match his eyes. "From several months ago," he added. I frowned. "I haven't had any noise complaints, ever." "March," the tall one said, "early morning hours." I thought about it despite myself. March had been uneventful, cold, muddy, nothing stood out. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "That's okay," the shorter one said. "We just need to ask a few questions." I asked who they were with. "Municipal," the tall one said. "Which department?" He paused, just a beat too long. "Compliance." That wasn't an answer. I tightened my grip on the door. "Do you have ID?" The shorter man smiled wider. "That won't help you." Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. Not threatening, not smug, just matter of fact, like he was saving me time. I should have closed the door. Instead, I asked what the complaint was about. "Sound coming from the lower level," the tall one said. "Sustained, rhythmic." "I don't have a lower level," I said. "It's a split level. The bottom floor is just a den and a laundry room." They both nodded. "That's what we have," the tall one said. I unlocked the chain. I still don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or the way they said things like they already knew the answers. They stepped inside without wiping their feet. Water didn't drip from their coats. The shorter one took a step to his left, glancing down the hallway. "Bathroom's there," he said casually. "Kitchen behind us." I hadn't said anything yet. The tall one looked toward the stairs that led up to the bedrooms. "Primary's at the end, guest room on the right." My heart started to thump harder. "You haven't been here before." "No," the shorter one said, "but layouts repeat." They walked forward without asking, slow and deliberate, like they were counting steps. I followed them, telling myself I could still kick them out if I needed to. They stopped at the top of the stairs and turned around together. "Back in March," the tall one said. "Did you hear anything unusual in the house late at night?" "No." "Any humming? Vibrations?" "No." "Did you have guests?" "No." The shorter one tilted his head. "Did you wake up at any point and feel like you'd missed time?" I laughed, sharp and nervous. "No." They exchanged a look. The tall one pulled out a small notebook, blank except for a few lines. He didn't write anything. "Do you still have the appliance?" he asked. "What appliance?" "The one in the laundry room," he said. "There's a washer and dryer." "Yes," he said, "that one." We went downstairs. The lights were off, but the tall one reached out and flipped the switch without hesitating. The room filled with harsh light. The washer sat where it always had. Old, loud, nothing special. The shorter man crouched and put his ear near the side panel. Just listened, smiling faintly. "It's quiet now," he said. "It's not running," I said. "Yes," he agreed. I asked again who they were. The tall one closed his notebook. "We're making sure everything remains consistent." "With what?" "With itself," the shorter one said. They headed back toward the front door. No urgency. No explanation. At the threshold, the tall one turned. "If you hear it again, you won't need to call." "I didn't call the first time," I said. He nodded. "We know." They stepped out into the rain. I watched through the window as they walked down the driveway. They didn't go toward the street. They turned sideways and crossed the lawn, cutting between my house and the neighbors, disappearing into the dark gap between properties. I stayed up all night, walked the house, checked every room. Nothing was out of place. Around 3 a.m., I heard a low sound from the laundry room. Not loud, just enough to notice, like something starting up, then stopping. I didn't go down to check. The email came in at 6:42 in the morning, right when the fog was starting to lift off the water. I was already awake because the ferry horn had gone off twice, low and long, the way it did when visibility was bad. I lived alone in a small rental on the Washington coast, just north of Aberdeen, close enough to the inlet that everything smelled like salt and wet wood. I'd posted the photos the night before, half expecting nothing to come of it. The subject line said, "Records Inquiry, reference 11B. The email itself was short, polite, no logos. It said my name, spelled correctly. Said they were with a regional records office and had some follow-up questions regarding images I'd recently shared online. It asked if I was available later that day to speak in person. No phone number. Just a line that said someone could stop by if that was convenient. I hadn't given my address anywhere. The photos were of something I'd seen out by the jetty the previous evening. I'd been walking my dog, Theo, just before sunset. The weather was calm, cloudy, that flat gray light you get before everything turns dark. Out over the water, maybe a few hundred yards out, there'd been something sitting just above the surface. Not moving, not blinking. Just a dull, metallic-looking shape, like a stretched oval, catching light wrong. I'd taken maybe 6 photos on my old Canon. Nothing fancy. By the time I lowered the camera and looked again, it wasn't there. No splash, no wake, just water. The photos weren't clear. I said that in the post. People argued about boats, buoys, reflections. A few people said drone. I stopped replying and went to bed. So when I got the email, my first thought was scam. My second thought was that maybe I'd messed up by posting at all. I didn't reply. At 11:10 a.m., someone knocked on my door. Theo barked once, then went quiet, tail low. That wasn't normal for him. I see the porch clearly when I open the door. There's no place to hide, no long walkway, just 3 steps and gravel beyond that. There was a man standing there holding a slim folder under one arm. He looked late 40s, maybe early 50s. Tall, but not in a noticeable way. Brown jacket, buttoned, even though it wasn't cold, gray slacks, clean shoes. He smiled like someone who practiced smiling in mirrors. "Mr. Calder," he said. "Thank you for your time." I asked who he was. Evan Holt, he said. I sent you an email this morning. Records office. He said it like that explained everything. I asked how he got my address. He said publicly available sources. That should have been my cue to close the door. Instead, I stepped aside. He didn't look around when he came in, didn't comment on the dog or the smell of coffee or anything. He stood where I indicated and waited. He asked about the photos. I told him what I'd seen, same as I'd written. Shape over the water. Still. Gone. He nodded at specific points, asked what direction I'd been facing, asked what time the ferry passed, asked whether the tide had been coming in or going out. I didn't remember mentioning the tide anywhere. He asked what kind of camera I used. When I told him, he nodded again like he already knew. Then he asked where the original memory card was. Still in the camera, I said. I uploaded straight from it. Excellent, he said. We'd like to take a look at that. I asked if he meant the photos. The card, he said. If you don't mind. I hesitated, asked why. He said, sometimes compression alters context. That didn't make sense, but he said it smoothly, like a line he'd used before. I went and got the camera, took out the SD card. It felt stupidly small sitting in my palm. He didn't touch it right away. Asked me to confirm that it hadn't been altered, that I hadn't copied it elsewhere, that I hadn't lent the camera to anyone. Then he took the card, slid it into a small envelope, and sealed it. How long will you need it? I asked. Not long, he said. We'll return it today. I asked him if this had anything to do with the ferry traffic or the Coast Guard. He smiled again. No, sir. Before he left, he paused at the door. You didn't see lights, he said. Not a question. No, I said. Just the shape. He nodded, satisfied, and stepped out into the fog. I watched him walk down the gravel, past my truck, and toward the road. I didn't hear a car start. I waited, listening, but there was nothing. When I stepped outside, the road was empty. At 4:30 that afternoon, there was another knock. Same man, same clothes, same folder. He handed me the envelope. Thank you for your cooperation, he said. I asked if he'd found anything. He said nothing outside expected parameters. I opened the envelope after he left. The card was inside. That night, I put it into my computer. It was blank, no photos, no file structure, like it had never been used. I checked the camera, same thing, no images. The camera's internal counter showed 0 shots taken. The next morning, I emailed him, asked what happened. He replied an hour later. The card was returned in its original condition. The message said, no data was present upon receipt. I walked back down to the jetty that evening. The water was rougher, windier, normal. Out over the same stretch, the ferry horn sounded once, long and low, even though visibility was clear. I didn't take my camera with me. The news clip played on the tiny TV behind the circulation desk while I was reshelving returns. It was a local segment, barely 2 minutes long, about several people reporting lights over the reservoir outside town the night before. Grainy phone video. A reporter standing in the wind, smiling like it was a slow news night. I wouldn't have paid attention if I hadn't been awake when it happened. I worked at the public library in a small town in western Pennsylvania. Nothing exciting ever made the news there. When it did, it was usually weather or a high school football game. The lights had shown up around 9:30 p.m., according to the report. That lined up with when I'd been locking up the back door at home. I remembered pausing on my porch because the sky looked wrong. Too bright in one spot, like someone had smudged it. I hadn't told anyone because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding stupid. I turned the TV volume down and went back to work. Around noon, 2 men came in through the front doors. I noticed them because they didn't slow down to orient themselves like everyone else did. They walked straight in, confident, coats still on, even though the library was warm. One was tall and thin with dark hair, the other shorter and broader with a round face that didn't quite match his sharp eyes. They didn't go to the desk. They went straight past it, toward the microfilm cabinets. I followed them, telling myself they were just researchers who'd been here before. Can I help you find something? I asked. The taller one turned, smiling politely. Yes, we're looking for regional records, municipal publications. Those are indexed, I said. I can pull. He reached out and slid open a drawer. Not just any drawer, the one at the bottom, second from the left, the one I'd never had a patron ask for, the one that wasn't listed on the public index. My stomach tightened. That section's not, I started. Restricted, the shorter one finished. We know. I stood there, hands clasped too tight. Those records don't officially exist. They both nodded, like that was reassuring. The taller one leaned down and scanned the labels. We're looking for material dated between 1958 and 1962. Local water authority, emergency bulletins, unpublished minutes. You can't just, I said. I need authorization. The shorter man smiled. We have it. From who? He glanced around the quiet room. A couple of seniors reading newspapers. A kid on a computer with headphones on. No one paying attention. You wouldn't recognize the name, he said. I asked for ID. The taller one opened his coat slightly, just enough for me to see a plain badge holder with a card inside. No seal I recognized, no name that stuck. It felt like my eyes slid off it. That's all we'll need, he said, closing it again. I should have called my supervisor. Instead, I unlocked the cabinet. I told myself it was easier than making a scene, that they'd just look and leave. They didn't use the reader. They didn't even take the reels out. The taller one just flipped through the drawer, fingers moving too fast like he already knew what he was looking for. This one, he said. The label was faded, no date, just a handwritten code. I didn't remember cataloging it. The shorter man looked at me. You were here late last night. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. You live near the reservoir. Another statement. Yes. Did you hear anything? No. He nodded, satisfied. They signed nothing. Took nothing. Just stood there for another moment like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. Thank you for your time, the taller one said. They left the drawer open when they walked away. I closed it with shaking hands. That afternoon dragged. Every sound made me look up. I kept expecting them to come back. They didn't. The next morning, I unlocked the library at 8 a.m. and went straight to the microfilm room. The cabinet was there. The drawers were there. The bottom left drawer was empty, not partially, completely. No reels, no dust outlines, like it had never held anything. I checked the log, no record of removal, no transfer slip, nothing. I called my supervisor. She said we'd never had anything like that cataloged, suggested I was mistaken. I watched the news again that night. No follow-up story, no mention of lights. I stopped looking at the sky. They rolled in just before closing, right when the heat finally started to let up. I was wiping my hands on a rag, thinking about locking the bay doors, when the black sedan eased into the gravel lot like it already knew where to stop. No music, no engine rev, nothing rattling, just tires crunching and then stillness. It parked crooked, half in the shade, half in the sun. First thing I noticed was the plates, or the lack of them. No front, no back, not even a temporary tag in the window. That wasn't unheard of out there, not completely. I ran a small shop off a 2-lane highway in eastern Nevada, 40 minutes from the nearest real town. People passed through with all kinds of problems that they didn't want questions about. As long as they paid and didn't cause trouble, I fixed what I could. 2 men got out. They didn't rush, didn't stretch, just stepped out and stood there for a second like they were waiting for something else to happen. Both wore dark jackets even though it was still close to 90 out. One was tall and thin with sharp cheekbones and hair combed flat against his head. The other was shorter, heavier, with a round face and a faint smile that never quite went away. The tall one spoke. You still open? For a bit, I said. What's the issue? Stalling, he said. Happens when we slow down. I nodded and gestured them toward the bay. Pop the hood. The shorter man walked around and did it himself, didn't fumble for the latch, just reached under like he'd done it 100 times. The engine bay looked clean. Too clean. No dust, no oil mist, no grime baked on from years of heat. I remember thinking it looked like something you'd see in a brochure, not on a car that had been driving through the desert. I leaned in, braced my hands on the frame, and started checking the obvious things. Hoses, belts, connections. Everything felt normal, solid, warm. The tall man stood close, watching my hands instead of my face. Did it make any noise when it stalled? I asked. No, he said. No warning lights? No. I hooked up my scanner. It didn't throw any codes. That annoyed me more than anything. Cars don't just stall for no reason. I asked how long it had been happening. Several weeks, the shorter one said. And you didn't bring it in sooner? We weren't nearby, he said. I worked in silence for a while. The air smelled like hot metal and old oil, the usual. Sweat ran down my back. The men didn't move, didn't talk to each other, didn't check their phones. At one point, I realized I couldn't hear the engine running. I straightened up. "Did you turn it off?" The tall man shook his head. "It's on." I leaned back in. The belts weren't moving. The fan wasn't spinning. No vibration through the frame. Nothing. I frowned, reached inside, and turned the key myself. Nothing changed. That should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I told myself something electrical was wrong. Ignition, maybe. I shut it off and told them I'd take it for a quick test drive. The tall man said, "That won't be necessary." "Kind of is," I said. "Hard to diagnose otherwise." They exchanged a look, not alarmed, just coordinated. "Very well," the shorter one said. I backed the car out. It rolled smoothly, no resistance. When I turned the key again, the dash lights came on like normal. I put it in drive. It moved, no sound, no vibration, just motion. I drove it maybe 100 yards down the road and back. It responded to the gas, the brakes, the steering. Everything felt fine, except for the part where it shouldn't have been moving at all. I parked it and got out, my hands shaking now. "There's nothing wrong with it," I said. "At least nothing I can find." "That's good," the tall man said. They paid in cash. Exact amount. Crisp bills like they'd come straight from a bank. As they were leaving, the shorter one paused. "While you were working," he said, "did you notice anything unusual?" "No," I said automatically. He smiled a little wider. "Good." They got in, closed the doors, and drove off. Still no sound. I locked up and went home. Tried to forget about it. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was replaying the whole thing in my head, that it clicked. I'd never seen pistons, or a block, or any wiring beyond what should have been there. I'd checked hoses that shouldn't have connected to anything, touched metal that didn't make sense. There hadn't been an engine. I went back to the shop and opened the bay, half expecting to find something left behind. A mark, a smell, anything. There was nothing. Around noon, I stepped outside and looked down the highway. A black sedan passed by, silent as ever, heading east. The voicemail came in while I was brushing my teeth. My phone was on the counter, screen lighting up with my own name. That caught my eye first. I remember leaning over the sink, foam still in my mouth, staring at it like it was a mistake that would correct itself if I waited long enough. I didn't answer it. I just let it ring out. When I wiped my mouth and picked the phone up, I saw the missed call and a new voicemail notification. Same number as mine. Same contact photo. Same everything. I stood there for a second, listening to the bathroom fan, trying to think of a normal explanation. Pocket dial didn't make sense. I hadn't touched the phone. It had been sitting face up the whole time. I hit play. At first, there was just background noise, faint like wind through a crack or a bad connection. Then a man cleared his throat. "Daniel," he said. He pronounced it right. Not Dan, not Danny. Daniel, the way my mother used to say it when she wanted my attention. "You're not going to want to hear this," he continued, calm and slow, like he was choosing each word carefully. "But you need to understand that attending the conference this weekend would be a mistake." I stopped breathing without realizing it. He went on. "You mentioned it in passing. That was enough. It doesn't matter that you didn't register yet. It doesn't matter that you didn't post about it." I felt cold then, all over, even though the heat was on. "You should stay home," he said. "If you don't, things will become complicated." There was a pause. I waited for him to keep talking. Instead, the message cut to silence. Then I heard breathing. Not loud, not distorted, just someone breathing slowly, close to the microphone. I counted 4 breaths before the voicemail ended. I checked the call details again. Same number, same phone. I stood in my bathroom for a long time after that, replaying it, trying to catch some glitch, some hint it was fake. There wasn't one. The audio was clean, no distortion except at the very start. I hadn't told anyone about the conference. Not in a text, not online. I'd only mentioned it once, out loud, 2 nights earlier when my friend Mark had stopped by. We'd been standing in my kitchen, drinking cheap beer, talking about nothing important. He'd mentioned he was heading out of town that weekend. I'd said, "Yeah, I was thinking about that UFO thing in Denver, but I'll probably skip it." That was it. No details, no date, no follow-up. After the voicemail, I called Mark. He didn't answer. I texted him. No response. I checked my call logs. There was no outgoing call to myself. Nothing weird. just the missed call and the voicemail. I barely slept. The next morning, I took the day off work. I kept the phone on the table in front of me, face up like it might move on its own. Every little sound in the apartment made me look up. Pipes knocking. A car door outside. Someone walking in the hall. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. I didn't answer right away. I looked through the peephole. Two men stood there, close together. Both wore dark coats, even though it was snowing lightly, not cold enough to justify them. One was taller, thin, with a narrow face and hair that looked too carefully arranged. The other was shorter, broader, with a rounder face and a neutral expression that didn't shift when he noticed the peephole darken. I opened the door a crack, chain still on. "Daniel Harper?" the tall one asked. "Yes." "We're here to clarify a misunderstanding," he said. "What misunderstanding?" "The one involving your voicemail," the shorter one said, smiling faintly. My stomach dropped. "I didn't leave a voicemail." They both nodded like that was expected. "May we come in?" the tall one asked. "No," I said. "You can talk from there." They didn't argue. The shorter one glanced past me into my apartment like he was checking something off a list. "You've been interested in anomalous aerial reports for a while," he said. "Casually, recreationally." "I read articles," I said. "That's not illegal." "No," the tall one agreed, "but context matters." I asked who they were. "Administrative," he said. "For who?" He smiled, just slightly. "For keeping things simple." I told them again I hadn't signed up for anything, that I wasn't planning to go anymore, that I didn't want trouble. "That's good," the shorter one said. "That's exactly what we wanted to hear." I asked how they'd left the voicemail. The tall one tilted his head. "We didn't leave anything. But you just said..." "The message was a courtesy," he said, "not an action." "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't need to," the shorter one said. "It just needs to work." Snow was collecting on their shoulders. Neither of them brushed it off. "Did you listen to the entire message?" the tall one asked. "Yes." "And the end?" he pressed. I heard breathing. They exchanged a look. Quick. Tight. "That part wasn't intended for you," the shorter one said. "Then why was it there?" He smiled again. "Technical overlap. I wanted to slam the door. Instead, I asked how the call came from my own number." The tall one leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Phones reuse pathways. Sometimes they loop." "That's not how." "You won't receive another message," he said, "as long as you don't put yourself in the wrong place." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. They both relaxed just a bit. "Good," the shorter one said. "Then this stays uncomplicated." They stepped back from the door together. As they turned to leave, I noticed something off about their footsteps. Not the sound, the timing. Like they were a fraction of a second out of sync with their movement. I closed the door and locked it. Stood there listening. I didn't hear them go down the hall. I didn't hear the building's front door open. I checked the peephole again. The hallway was empty. That night, I powered my phone off and left it on the kitchen counter. I didn't trust it near my bed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up anyway. No sound had woken me. I just opened my eyes. From the kitchen, I heard quiet breathing. I stayed very still until morning. I was already awake when the lights showed up, because the cows wouldn't settle. It was late summer, just after midnight. Hot in that heavy way where the air doesn't move, even though the fields are wide open. I'd been lying in bed, listening to the lowing carry through the open window. It wasn't panicked, just restless, like they were aware of something I wasn't. I got up, pulled on my boots, and stepped out onto the porch. From where I stood, I could see most of my south field. Corn on the far end, pasture closer to the house. The moon was bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. That's when I noticed the light hovering low over the corn, maybe 30 feet up. It wasn't intense, not like a spotlight, more like a soft glow, pale yellow, steady as if it had weight to it. It drifted slowly, not side to side. More like it was adjusting itself, small corrections staying over the same stretch of rows. I watched it for a while, trying to decide what it could be. Helicopter didn't fit. No sound at all. Drone didn't fit either, too smooth, too quiet, and too big. I walked a little closer, stopping at the fence line. The cows were bunched up at the far end of the pasture, facing away from the light. None of them were grazing. They just stood there, heads low, tails still. After maybe a minute, the light dimmed. Not faded out, just dropped in brightness until it was gone, like someone turning a dial. I stood there longer than I should have. Nothing else happened. The night sounds came back. Insects mostly. Eventually, I went back inside. The next morning, I found 3 flattened patches in the corn. Perfect circles, about 6 feet across. The stalks weren't broken, just pressed down evenly like something heavy had settled there and lifted straight back up. I called the county extension office first. Then, after thinking about it, I called the sheriff. I told him I'd seen an unexplained light and had damage to my field. He asked a few questions, sounded bored, said he'd note it. I didn't expect anything else to come of it. 2 days later, right around dusk, a dark sedan pulled into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window. No dust trail, even though the road was dry. The car stopped neatly, dead center, not crooked like most people managed. 2 men got out. They were dressed wrong for the farm. Dark slacks, button-up shirts, thin jackets despite the heat. One was tall and narrow, with a long face and hair combed flat. The other was shorter, heavier, with a round face and eyes that didn't quite land on things when he looked at them. They didn't look around, didn't take in the house or the barns, just walked straight up to the door. I met them on the porch. The taller one spoke. "Mr. Harlan? That's me. We're following up on a report," he said, "regarding unusual illumination over your property." I nodded. "You at the sheriff's office?" He hesitated. "Adjacent." That was his word. "Adjacent." I asked for ID. The shorter one smiled. "That won't be necessary." I should have shut the door. Instead, I stepped aside and let them onto the porch, keeping myself between them and the house. They asked me to describe what I'd seen. I told them. The light, the field, the time. They asked about the cows. "How many units are present?" the taller one asked. "Units? The livestock," he clarified. "Cows," I said. 63. He nodded, writing it down carefully. "And their response?" "They were spooked," I said. "Bunched up. Quiet." "Did any units become non-functional?" the shorter one asked. I stared at him. "You mean did any die?" He blinked. "Yes." "No." They seemed relieved. They asked about the corn. "Surface material appears disturbed," the tall one said. "Can you quantify loss?" "It's a crop," I said. "Corn. And no, not much loss." He frowned slightly. "The surface material has economic value." "Yes," I said. "That's why it's a crop." They exchanged a look, subtle but tense, like I'd corrected them on something important. I led them out toward the field. The sun was low, casting long shadows. The flattened circles were still there, obvious once you knew where to look. The shorter man crouched at the edge of one and touched the soil with his fingertips. He rubbed them together, studying the dirt like it might tell him something. "Thermal effect minimal," he said. The taller one stepped into the circle and turned slowly, scanning the rows. "No charring." "No," I said, "just flattened." "Pressure-based interaction," he said, like he was thinking out loud. They asked if I'd heard any noise. Felt any remembered confusion, lost time. "No," I said to all of it. They wandered the field without asking, stepping between rows, pausing now and then to look up at the sky even though it was still light out. I noticed their shoes then, plain black, no tread I recognized, smooth in places that should have been worn down. They didn't leave clear prints in the dry dirt, just shallow impressions that didn't look right. Too even, too narrow. When they were done, the taller one faced me. "You may experience further anomalies," he said. "If so, you do not need to report them." "I already did report this," I said. He nodded. "Yes." The shorter man smiled again. "No further action is required on your part." They walked back toward the driveway. I followed, watching their feet. The impressions they left didn't match boots or dress shoes. The heel was wrong, too rounded, the toe too long. Before getting in the car, the shorter one turned back. "Your units are adequate," he said. "Please continue standard operations." Then they drove away. Still no dust. I walked back into the field after they left. The footprints were already fading, not blown away by wind, just gone. That night the cows were quiet. The corn stood where it had been flattened before, slowly springing back. I didn't call anyone again. I was on my 3rd patrol of the night when the lights showed up. It was just after 2 a.m., the slowest part of the shift. The facility had been shut down for years, but the company still paid for overnight security because of liability and scrap thieves. It sat on the edge of town, surrounded by chain-link fence and weeds that had grown taller than the warning signs. Old manufacturing plant. Concrete, metal, empty rooms that still smelled faintly like oil and dust. I'd worked there for almost 2 years. Same route every night, same sounds, Same nothing. That night was cold and clear. No wind, the kind of quiet where your own footsteps feel intrusive. I was halfway across the east lot when I noticed a glow behind the main building, low and steady, like a floodlight someone had forgotten to shut off. There weren't any working lights back there. I stopped walking and watched it for a few seconds. It didn't move. Didn't flicker. Just sat there, pale white, reflecting off the back wall and the weeds along the fence. I called it in on the radio. No response. Dispatch was probably dealing with drunks downtown. That happened a lot. I didn't go investigate right away. That's not bravery, that's experience. When something's wrong, rushing toward it usually just gives you more problems. After maybe 30 seconds, the light went out. Not like a switch, more like someone pinching it closed. The darkness snapped back into place. I stood there longer than I meant to. Nothing else happened. No sounds, no movement. Eventually, I finished the patrol and went back to the guard shack. I logged it as unidentified light source, duration under 1 minute. That was about as far as I could go without sounding stupid. At 3:18 a.m., there was a knock on the shack door. Nobody ever knocked. If someone needed in, they called ahead or used the keypad. I opened the door partway. 2 men stood outside under the overhang, dry despite the frost forming on everything else. Both wore dark coats, thin and plain. One was tall and narrow with a long face and dark hair combed flat. The other was shorter, heavier with a round face and eyes that didn't quite focus on me. Evening, the tall one said. Or morning, I suppose. I asked how they got past the gate. The shorter one smiled. We didn't. That didn't make sense, and I said so. We're here regarding your report, the tall one said. About the lights. I just logged that, I said. Who are you? They stepped inside without waiting for permission. The shack felt smaller immediately. The shorter one glanced up at the ceiling. Not at the lights, just up, like he was listening through it. The tall one noticed and paused mid-sentence until the shorter man nodded slightly. Then he continued. You observed illumination near the rear structure, he said. Yes. At approximately 2:07 a.m. Yes. Did the light move? No. Did it produce sound? No. Did you feel disoriented? No. The shorter man kept glancing upward, every few seconds. Quick looks, like checking a clock only he could see. I asked again who they were. Contracted oversight, the tall one said. For who? He smiled faintly. For continuity. That answer didn't sit right. I noticed then that neither of them had asked for my name, or my ID. They already knew where to find me. They asked me to describe the light again. I did, same as before. The tall one nodded. The shorter one tilted his head, listening to the ceiling again. His lips moved once, silently. Did you observe any personnel? The tall one asked. No. Any vehicles? No. Any missing time? No. The shorter man finally looked at me. That's good. Why? I asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It simplifies things. I crossed my arms. I did my job. If there's nothing else, I've got patrols to finish. The tall one pulled a single sheet of paper from his coat. Just a quick acknowledgement. He set it on the desk between us, along with a pen. The paper had the company letterhead at the top, my name printed neatly beneath it. A statement confirming that I had not observed anything unusual beyond routine environmental lighting. That's not what I saw, I said. It is, he said calmly. In context. I'm not signing that. The shorter man glanced up again, longer this time. His smile tightened, then relaxed. You already did, he said. I laughed once, sharp and nervous. No, I didn't. The tall man turned the paper slightly so I could see the bottom. There was my signature. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was close enough. Same slant. Same loop on the R. Same hesitation at the end of my last name. My stomach dropped. I don't remember signing that, I said. That's expected, the tall one said. I asked when it had been signed. Earlier, he said. Earlier when? The shorter man answered without looking at me. Before you noticed the lights. That made my head feel wrong, like something shifting just out of reach. I told them they needed to leave, that I was calling my supervisor. The tall one nodded. That won't be necessary. The shorter man looked up at the ceiling one last time, then nodded back like he'd gotten confirmation. We're finished, the tall one said. They walked out of the shack together. I followed to the door, watching them cross the lot. They didn't go toward the gate. They walked straight toward the main building, passing into the shadow along its side. I waited for them to come out the other end. They didn't. I didn't see them leave. I didn't hear anything. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. I finished my patrols on autopilot. The facility felt different, not active, just attentive. When my relief arrived at 6 a.m., I went home without saying much. That afternoon, after I'd slept a few hours, I checked the online log system. The signed statement was there, time-stamped 1:54 a.m. I was on camera at that time, walking the north fence. I didn't file a report about the men. I still work security, just not there anymore. Sometimes, when I'm doing rounds late at night, I catch myself glancing up at ceilings without knowing why. They showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, right when the light in the house turns flat and gray. I was folding laundry in the living room, windows cracked because it had been raining all morning, and the air still smelled like wet leaves. Late October. The woods behind my place were already thinning out, branches showing through like bones. I hadn't been expecting anyone. Nobody ever came out that far unless they meant to. The knock was gentle. Not tentative, just controlled. 2 knocks, a pause, then one more. I remember thinking it was strange that I hadn't heard a car. When I opened the door, 2 men stood on the porch, close enough that I could see the rain beating on their jackets. Both wore dark coats, almost identical, cut a little too neatly for where I lived. One was tall and thin with a long face and hair parted sharply on the side. The other was shorter, heavier, with a rounder face and eyes that didn't quite settle on me when he looked my way. The taller one spoke first. "Miss Klein?" "Yes," I said. "Can I help you?" He smiled, polite but careful. "We're here to follow up on a report you made several years ago." I frowned. "About what?" "The incident in the woods," the shorter one said, like it was obvious. "Behind your property." My stomach tightened before my brain caught up. "That was a long time ago," I said. "Yes," the tall one agreed. "It was." I'd been in my early 20s then, living alone out here because it was cheap and quiet. I'd told one deputy once that I thought I'd seen something come down behind the ridge late at night. A flash, a sound like something heavy hitting wet ground. He'd written it down, asked a few questions, and that had been it. No one ever followed up. I'd convinced myself over the years that I'd exaggerated it in my head. I crossed my arms. "Who are you with?" The shorter man smiled. "We apologize for being behind schedule." "That doesn't answer my question," the tall one said. "May we come in?" "No," I said. "You can talk from there." They didn't seem offended. If anything, they looked relieved. "Understandable," the tall one said. "This won't take long." He pulled a slim folder from under his coat. Not a clipboard, not a briefcase, just a folder, like something you'd carry school papers in. "You reported a visual event approximately 8 years ago," he said. "Late evening, heavy rain. You described a flash of light and a loud impact." I hadn't remembered mentioning the rain. "I was younger," I said. "I might have been mistaken." "Possibly," the shorter one said. "But the description was consistent." "With what?" He tilted his head slightly. "Other reports." I felt the cold then, creeping up my arms even though the house behind me was warm. "You said this wouldn't take long," I said. "So what do you want?" The tall man opened the folder and turned it toward me. Inside were photographs, not old ones, not grainy or faded, clear, color photos. My kitchen. From inside. One showed my back door, taken from the corner near the ceiling. Another showed my living room couch, the one I was standing next to now with the folded laundry on it. The third was my bedroom, my bed, unmade. The window over it cracked open the way I always left it. The timestamp on the corner of the last photo was from the previous week. I couldn't speak for a moment. "We're sorry," the tall one said quietly. "We should have contacted you sooner." "How did you get these?" I finally asked. The shorter one glanced past me into the house. "You keep your doors unlocked during the day." "That doesn't." My voice shook. "You've been inside my house?" "Briefly," he said. "You weren't home." I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there gripping the doorframe so hard my fingers hurt. "We're not here about the photographs," the tall one said. "They're just verification." "Verification of what?" "That you're still here," he said. "That nothing has changed." "Nothing has changed since when?" They exchanged a look. Quick, subtle. "Since the incident," the shorter one said. I shook my head. "I haven't seen anything since then. Nothing crashed. Nothing came out of the woods." I told the deputy that. "Yes," the tall one said. "And that was accurate." "Then why are you here?" He closed the folder. Because time passed. That didn't make sense, and I told him so. Time doesn't always move evenly, the shorter one said, smiling like he was trying to soften it. Sometimes things fall behind. I noticed then that neither of them had gotten wet. Their jackets were damp looking, but not soaked. No water pooled on the porch beneath them, no footprints. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," the tall one said. "We just needed to confirm your account." "Again?" "Yes." He asked me to describe the night. I did. The sound, the flash, the way the woods smelled afterward like burned metal and wet dirt. I hadn't thought about that part in years. They listened without interrupting. When I finished, the shorter one nodded. "And you never went to look?" "No," I said. "I wasn't stupid." "That was good," he said. "You made the correct decision." The tall one checked his watch. It didn't look digital or analog, just dark. "We won't need to bother you again," he said. "You already have," I said. "You came into my house." He met my eyes for the first time. "That won't happen again." I didn't believe him. As they turned to leave, the shorter one paused. "You may notice things," he said. "Memories surfacing, details that don't feel like they belong to you." "I already have," I said. He smiled faintly. "That's expected." They walked off the porch and into the trees instead of toward the driveway. I watched until I couldn't see them anymore. I locked the door and went through the house, checking every room. Nothing was out of place. No signs of anyone having been there. That night, I lay awake listening to the woods. Around 3 in the morning, I thought I heard something heavy moving far back among the trees. Not crashing, just adjusting itself. In the morning, there were fresh footprints near my back door. They weren't human. The email came in 10 minutes after the episode went live. I was still sitting at my desk, headphones around my neck, watching the download numbers tick up. It was a hot dusk in late July, the kind where the sun was down, but the heat stuck around like it had nowhere else to go. My apartment windows were open, and I could hear traffic from the freeway a few blocks away. The subject line just said, "Invitation." No sender name, no logo. The message was short, polite. It thanked me for the episode and said they appreciated the care I took with accuracy. It invited me to a private meeting the following afternoon downtown at an address I recognized as an office building but couldn't place exactly. It said attendance was optional but strongly recommended. I assumed it was a prank or some weird networking thing. The show wasn't huge. It did okay, but I wasn't exactly famous. I hosted a podcast about unexplained sightings, local stories, stuff people emailed me. I always made it clear when I was speculating. I thought that mattered. The episode that had just gone up was about lights over a dry lake bed in California. A caller had claimed to see something come down years ago. I'd filled in some gaps for pacing, nothing wild, just guesses, tone, shape, stuff to keep it interesting. I didn't reply to the email. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite. Same address, same time. Already accepted. I checked my sent mail. Nothing. Checked my calendar history. No record of me clicking anything. I told myself it was easier to just go than sit with that feeling all night. The building was downtown, glass and concrete, half offices, half empty floors. I took the elevator up to the 12th floor. No one else was inside. The air conditioning was on, but it felt wrong somehow, like it was blowing without cooling anything. The suite number from the invite led me to a conference room at the end of a quiet hallway. No receptionist, no signs, just a door with frosted glass. I knocked. It opened immediately. 2 men were inside, already seated at the table. They stood when I entered. Both wore dark suit, looked identical in cut, but slightly off in fit, like they'd been tailored from memory instead of measurements. One was tall and thin, long face, hair parted sharply. The other was shorter, broader, with a round face and a pleasant expression that didn't change. "Thanks for coming, Alex," the tall one said. I hadn't introduced myself. They gestured for me to sit. I did, mostly because my legs felt strange, like I'd walked farther than I remembered. A bottle of water sat in front of my chair. No label. The shorter man smiled. "We enjoyed the episode." "Which one?" I asked, even though I knew. "The most recent," he said. "About the lake." The tall man nodded. "Very accurate." I laughed a little. It was a mix. Some of it was speculation. "Yes," the tall one said. "That's what we wanted to discuss." They asked about my process. how I chose stories, how I decided what details to emphasize. I gave my usual answers. Research, pattern recognition, intuition, nothing fancy. They listened closely. The shorter one kept glancing toward the ceiling, not at anything specific, just up, like he was waiting for a noise only he could hear. The tall one leaned forward. In the episode, you described the light as flattening briefly before impact. I nodded. That was just me imagining how it might have looked. And the color shift, the shorter one added, from white to dull orange. Yeah, I said, just narrative. They exchanged a look. That detail was correct, the tall one said. I frowned. According to who? According to records, he said. What records? He smiled slightly. The kind you don't have access to. I felt my mouth go dry. They went on, calmly, pointing out other things. The way I described the sound as more of a pressure than a noise. The way I'd said the ground looked disturbed, but not burned. The timing, the duration. One by one, they listed things I'd made up to fill space. All of that, the shorter one said, was uncomfortably close. I leaned back in my chair. If you're saying I got lucky, okay, but that's all it was. The tall man shook his head. Luck doesn't cluster. They told me they weren't there to threaten me. They didn't ask me to sign anything. They didn't ask me to take the episode down. They just asked me to stop guessing. Stick to what people report, the shorter one said. Don't add connective tissue. That's kind of the job, I said. It doesn't have to be, the tall one replied. You're good at restraint. Use it. I asked who they were. The shorter man smiled. Listeners. That's not funny. We're serious, he said. We like your work. We'd like it to remain harmless. I noticed then that neither of them had touched the water on the table. Mine hadn't been opened either. I didn't remember setting it down. What happens if I don't? I asked. The tall one paused, like he was checking something. The shorter one looked up at the ceiling again and gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic, the tall one said. We'll continue. You'll continue. It will just get harder. To do what? To sleep, the shorter one said quietly. That ended the meeting. They stood. I stood. The tall one opened the door for me. As I stepped into the hallway, the shorter one spoke behind me. The part at the end of the episode, he said, about the smell. I turned. That wasn't necessary, he said, but it was accurate. I left without responding. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked slightly delayed, like it was catching up. When I got home, it was fully dark. The apartment was exactly how I'd left it, except my laptop was open on the desk. The audio editor was up. The waveform for the episode scrolled on its own, stopping at the exact moment where I'd started speculating. I didn't touch it. I posted a shorter episode the next week. Just interviews. No guesses. The download numbers dipped, then leveled out. Sometimes when I'm recording late, I find myself pausing mid-sentence for no clear reason, listening to the quiet in the room, careful not to say too much. I noticed them because my dog wouldn't stop growling. It was close to midnight, one of those quiet weekday nights where the street felt paused. I'd taken Milo out into the backyard before bed. The air was cool, early spring, damp enough that the porch light had a halo around it. No wind, no cars passing, just the hum from the transformer a block over. Milo stood stiff near the fence, staring through the slats toward my neighbor's house. Low growl, not loud, but steady. He never did that. Even when raccoons cut through, he usually just sniffed and went back to his business. I followed his line of sight. Across the narrow strip of lawn between our houses, my neighbor Eric stood on his front porch. He was barefoot, wearing jeans and a hoodie like he just stepped outside without thinking about it. That part was normal. He did that sometimes to smoke late. What wasn't normal were the two men standing with him. They were positioned symmetrically, one on each side of him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched his. Both wore dark coats that hung straight down, no wrinkles, no movement, same height, same build, same posture. Even from my yard, I could tell their faces matched too closely to be coincidence. They stood with their hands clasped in front of them, heads angled slightly toward Eric as he spoke. I couldn't hear what he was saying. His mouth moved, but his voice didn't carry. The men didn't respond. They just watched him, heads tilting in small, identical motions, like they were syncing up. I leaned closer to the fence without realizing it. Milo's growl deepened. One of the men turned his head, not toward me exactly, just slightly, like he'd picked up on something changing in the environment. His eyes landed somewhere near my porch light, not directly on me, but close enough that my stomach dropped. The other one turned a second later, matching the angle perfectly. Eric stopped talking. He followed their gaze and looked toward my house. Our eyes met for half a second. His face looked tight, confused, like he'd been interrupted mid-thought. Then one of the men leaned in and said something to him. Quiet. Close. Eric nodded. Once. Hard. The men stepped back in unison. They didn't walk down the porch steps. They stepped off the side, straight onto the grass, and moved out of view along the side of the house. No sound. No crunch of gravel. Nothing. Eric stood there alone for a few seconds longer. Then he went inside and shut the door. I stayed outside longer than I needed to, scanning the street. I didn't see anyone walking away. No cars started. No headlights. The night stayed exactly the same. The next morning, Eric's driveway was empty. That alone wouldn't have meant much. He worked early sometimes, but by noon, his trash cans were gone. By late afternoon, there was a rental truck parked out front, already loaded, with two movers I didn't recognize standing around waiting. I walked over, partly out of concern, partly because I needed to know if I'd imagined the night before. Eric wasn't there. I asked one of the movers if he was okay. The guy shrugged. Don't know. Job was prepaid. House was mostly empty already. That didn't make sense. Eric had lived there for at least 3 years. I'd helped him carry in a couch when he moved in. I'd borrowed tools from him. We talked over the fence about dumb stuff like lawn care and weather. By evening, the truck was gone. The house was dark. No goodbye. No note. No sign. A week passed. Then 2. A for sale sign went up without any notice from a realtor. No pictures in the listing. Just an address and a price that was low enough to make me uncomfortable. Out of curiosity, I clicked through the property history online. According to the listing, the house had never been occupied. No prior owners, no rental history, no utility records attached to a resident. Built 8 years ago, vacant ever since. I checked older listings. Same thing. I stood in my kitchen, laptop open, staring out the window at a house I'd watched someone live in for years. I remembered Eric's laugh. His car. The way he always forgot to bring his trash bins back in. I remembered his porch light being broken for months. None of that showed up anywhere. A few nights later, close to midnight again, Milo growled at the fence. I didn't go outside this time. The house next door stayed empty. No one ever moved in. The for sale sign eventually came down. The listing disappeared. Sometimes late at night, I saw the porch light flick on by itself, just for a second, then go dark again. I stopped looking. The call came in at 10:18 p.m., right as the fog started rolling off the river. Dispatch said a resident on Brookline Drive reported 2 men going door to door, asking questions that didn't make sense. No threats, no weapons mentioned, just unusual behavior. That kind of call usually meant bored neighbors or someone selling solar panels too late. Still, it was a quiet night, and Brookline was in my zone. I turned off the main road and into the neighborhood. Fog hung low, not thick enough to hide things, just enough to blur the streetlights and make every house look slightly farther away than it really was. It was a newer development, split levels and ranches, all beige and gray. I'd responded there plenty of times before. Noise complaints, domestic stuff, nothing strange. I parked near the middle of the block and stepped out. The air smelled damp and cold. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then stopped. I started walking. Halfway down the street, I saw them. 2 men stood on the sidewalk in front of a house on the left, close together, facing the front door. Both wore dark coats, long and plain. No hats. No visible logos. They were almost the same height, same build. One was maybe a little broader in the shoulders, but it was hard to tell in the fog. The homeowner stood in the doorway, one hand on the doorframe, body angled like he was thinking about closing it. The men weren't blocking him. They weren't aggressive, they were just there. I walked up, boots loud on the wet concrete. Evening, I said. Everything okay here? Both men turned toward me at the same time. The homeowner looked relieved. He stepped back inside without a word and shut the door. The taller man spoke. Officer Ramirez. I paused. Yes? He smiled faintly. Not friendly, not unfriendly either. Just practiced. Badge number 4172. That hit harder than it should have. Who are you? I asked. The other man spoke this time. His voice was calm even. We're just asking questions. You can do that during business hours, I said, not by going door to door at night. We're nearly finished, he said. I asked for ID. The taller man tilted his head slightly. That won't be necessary. I shifted my weight, resting a hand near my belt. It is if you want to stay here. They didn't move, didn't react. The shorter one looked past me, down the street, like he was checking something I couldn't see. You grew up on Alameda Street, he said casually. Blue house, chain link fence in the front yard. My mouth went dry. That address hasn't existed under that number since the late 90s, the taller one added. Your parents sold it after the flood. I stared at them, trying to decide if this was some kind of sick joke. That information isn't relevant, I said. No, the shorter one agreed. But it's accurate. I told them they needed to leave. Now. They looked at each other. Not for long, just enough. The taller one nodded. Of course. They stepped off the sidewalk and walked past me, heading deeper into the fog. Not toward a car, not toward the main road. Just down the block, their shapes fading between the houses. I watched until I couldn't see them anymore. I knocked on the door of the house they'd been at. The homeowner, a middle-aged guy named Nolan, cracked it open. What did they want? I asked. He shook his head. They were asking about lights, said people had seen something last winter. Asked if I'd noticed anything unusual. Did you? No, he said. I told them no. Did they show ID? No. Did they say who they were with? He hesitated. They said records, whatever that means. I took his statement, told him to call again if they came back, and walked back to my cruiser. I sat there for a minute with the engine running, fog drifting across the windshield. I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain, like the street was listening. I drove the rest of the block. No sign of them. No parked cars that didn't belong. No footprints I could see on the damn sidewalk. Back at the station, I wrote it up. 2 unknown males, dark clothing, asking residents about reported lights, possession of personal information, unknown origin. I flagged it for follow-up. I saved the report, logged out, went home. I didn't sleep well. The next afternoon, I checked the system. My report wasn't there. Not pending. Not flagged. Gone. Like I'd never written it. I asked the desk sergeant if there'd been an issue with the system overnight. He looked it up. No outages. I searched by case number. Nothing. I searched by my badge number. Still nothing. When I told him what the report was about, he frowned. You sure you submitted it? Yes, I said. He shrugged. Happens sometimes. It didn't. That night, when I pulled into my driveway, my porch light was on. I was sure I'd turned it off that morning. Inside, everything looked normal. No signs of anyone being there. On my kitchen counter, next to my keys, was a sticky note. Just one line, written in neat, careful handwriting. Thank you for your time, Officer Ramirez. I threw it away and double-checked every lock. I didn't get another call about door-to-door men. But sometimes, on foggy nights, when I'm driving patrol and my radio goes quiet, I get the feeling that if I pull over and step out, someone will already know exactly where I'm standing. They came in right after we opened while I was still booting up my computer and the coffee hadn't finished dripping. It was a gray morning, steady rain tapping the windows in that dull, patient way that makes time feel thicker. The county records office was on the second floor of a concrete building downtown. Fluorescent lights, low ceilings, the smell of paper and old carpet. I'd worked there 6 years. Nothing ever surprised me anymore. Until that morning. 2 men stood at the counter, already waiting. I didn't hear them come in. 1 second I was hanging my jacket on the back of my chair. The next I looked up and they were just there. No umbrellas. No water on their coats. Both dressed the same. Dark jackets, dark slacks, plain shoes that looked new in a way shoes usually don't. They were smiling. Not wide smiles. Just held too long, like they'd started and forgotten to stop. Morning, I said automatically. How can I help you? The taller one spoke. We're looking for a file. Name? I asked. Case number. He slid a slip of paper across the counter. It had a reference code written in neat block letters. No letterhead, no stamp, just the code. I frowned. This doesn't match our system. That's fine, the shorter one said. His voice was calm, pleasant, like a customer trying to be helpful. It wouldn't. I looked back up at them. What department are you with? They glanced at each other, still smiling. Records, the taller one said. I almost laughed. You're already here. Yes, he agreed, but older. Something about the way he said it made my shoulders tense. I'll need authorization, I said, and a supervisor sign-off. That won't be necessary, the shorter one said. The file predates your building. I stared at him. That doesn't make sense. He nodded. We know. I should have stopped right there. Should have called my manager, Teresa, whose office was 20 feet away. Instead, I turned the slip of paper over in my hands. The code wasn't random. It followed an old archival format I'd only seen once in a training manual from the 70s. A format we never used because the building hadn't existed back then. Where did you get this? I asked. The taller man's smile tightened, just a fraction. From you. I've never seen it before. Not recently, he said. Rain streaked down the window behind them, blurring the parking lot into gray smears. The office felt quieter than usual. No printers running, no phones ringing. Which section would this even be in? I asked. Sub-level, the shorter one said. Storage B. My stomach dropped. Storage B wasn't on any public map. It was a locked room in the basement, mostly empty shelves and a few boxes we hadn't gotten around to cataloging because officially there was nothing down there worth keeping. I'll check, I said, mostly to get away from the counter. They didn't thank me. They didn't move. They just stood there, smiling, hands folded in front of them like mannequins. The stairwell smelled like damp concrete. The lights flickered the way they always did. I told myself this was stupid, that I could still turn around. Storage B's door was unlocked. That alone was wrong. I flipped on the light and walked between the shelves, code slip in hand. The shelves were numbered, but someone had added a handwritten tag to one of them. Faded ink. Same code. My pulse picked up. The box was heavier than it should have been. No label on the outside, just dust, thick enough that my fingerprints showed clearly when I lifted it. Inside was a single manila folder. The folder was old, not just worn, but aged in a way paper only gets after decades. The tab was blank. I opened it. Photographs slid partway out, black and white, glossy. The first photo showed a dirt lot. I recognized it immediately. Same slope, same tree line, same utility pole leaning slightly to the left. It was the lot outside our building, except there was no building. Just open ground, churned mud, and tire tracks. I flipped to the next photo. Same angle, same lot. This time there were chalk outlines on the ground, measurements marked with stakes, the beginning of a foundation. The next photo showed framing. The next showed scaffolding. I kept flipping, faster now, my hands shaking. Every stage of construction was there. Photos taken from inside the space that would eventually become our office. Same perspective as my desk. Same window placement. One photo showed the exact spot I was standing, except the floor was unfinished concrete, and there was a man standing there, blurred slightly like he'd moved during the shot. He was looking directly at the camera. I closed the folder. My ears rang like I'd stood up too fast. I carried the box back upstairs, my legs on autopilot. The two men were still at the counter. They hadn't moved an inch. I set the box down harder than I meant to. These are construction photos. Yes, the taller one said. Taken before the building existed, I said. Yes. From inside the building, I added. They both nodded, pleased. That's not possible, I said. The shorter one leaned forward slightly. It was inevitable. I swallowed. Why do you want this? The taller man took the folder out of the box, careful, almost reverent. Continuity, he said. And me? I asked. Why show me? They paused. For timing, the shorter one said. We were a little behind. They slid the folder back into the box and closed the lid. You won't need to log this, the taller one said. I absolutely do, I said. They smiled wider. When I looked down to grab the logbook, the box was gone. So were they. The office noise came back all at once. Phones ringing, printer whining, Teresa calling my name from her office. I stood there, empty-handed, rain still tapping the windows. Later that afternoon, I went back down to Storage B. The shelves were empty. No box. No handwritten tag. No dust. That night, when I got home, my phone buzzed with a notification from the building's archive system. A new file had been added. I didn't open it. I still work there. I still pull records every day. Sometimes when I'm alone in the office early in the morning, I catch myself smiling at nothing, just for a second too long, and I have to consciously stop. I took the picture from the turnout above the quarry, the one nobody really used anymore because the guardrail was bent and the sign had faded until you couldn't read it. It was early evening, late September, still warm enough that the asphalt held heat. I'd just gotten my license a month earlier, and my parents let me drive the old Subaru up there as long as I was home by 10. I went a lot, mostly to sit and listen to music and feel like I was somewhere else. That night, the sky looked wrong. Not dramatic, just off. The clouds were thin and stretched, and there was this darker patch hanging over the ridge to the west, like a smudge that didn't move with the rest of them. I noticed it while I was scrolling on my phone, not even looking up on purpose. I got out of the car and leaned on the hood. The air smelled like dust and pine. Somewhere below, machinery clanked from the quarry, steady and distant. The dark patch shifted. It wasn't fast. It kind of folded like someone pinching fabric from underneath. A shape came out of it. Long, narrow, not sharp exactly, but defined. It caught the last of the sun and went dull gray, then darker. I didn't think UFO. I thought plane. Then drone. Then I realized it wasn't making any sound. I grabbed my camera from the back seat. It was an old Canon my uncle had given me. I liked it better than my phone because it made things feel real. I took 3 photos. On the third one, the shape seemed closer. Not bigger, just clearer, like my eyes had adjusted. I remember my hands shaking a little and being annoyed at myself for that. Then it slipped back into the clouds. Not upward, just sideways, like it was being erased. The quarry noise didn't stop. The wind didn't change. Everything else stayed the same. I stood there longer than I should have, then got back in the car and drove home. I didn't tell my parents. I uploaded one of the photos to my laptop in my room and stared at it until my eyes hurt. The shape was there, faint, but real. Not a blur, not a reflection. I didn't post it anywhere. I sent it to my friend Lucas with a dumb message like, "What do you think this is, lol?" He never replied. The next afternoon when I got home from school, there was a car parked across the street. Black sedan. Clean. No plates that I could see from where I stood. That didn't register right away. Lots of people parked weird on our street. I went inside. My parents weren't home yet. I dumped my backpack and went to my room. That's when I heard the doorbell. I checked the window first. The black sedan was closer now, pulled up in front of our house. 2 men stood on the porch. They weren't wearing suits exactly, more like dark jackets and slacks, neat but not formal. One was taller, thin, with hair parted so straight it looked uncomfortable. The other was shorter, heavier, with a round face and a polite smile that didn't change. I opened the door because I didn't know what else to do. "Hi," the taller one said. "You're Aaron." "Yes." "We were hoping to speak with you for a moment," the shorter one said. "May we come in?" I hesitated. "My parents aren't home." "That's fine," the taller one said. "This won't take long." I let them in and immediately felt stupid for it. They stood in the living room, looking around like they were checking measurements. Well, not curious, just precise. The shorter one glanced down the hallway. "Your room is at the end." I didn't answer. The taller one smiled. "We're here about a photograph." My stomach dropped. "What photograph?" "The one you took yesterday evening," he said, "near the quarry." I felt my face get hot. I didn't take anything illegal. "No," the shorter one said. "You didn't take anything at all." They said it gently, like they were correcting a small mistake. "That doesn't make sense," I said. The taller man nodded. "That's why we're here." They asked if we could talk in my room. I didn't like that they already knew where it was, but I led them anyway. My camera sat on the desk where I'd left it. The shorter man picked it up without asking. He turned it over in his hands, nodding to himself. "There's no photograph on this device," he said. "Yes, there is," I said. "I looked at it." He smiled. "You remember looking at it." The taller man pulled a small notebook from his jacket and opened it to a blank page. "Could you describe what you saw?" I crossed my arms. "Why?" "Because it's useful," he said. "I don't want to." "That's okay," the shorter one said. "You will anyway." I told them about the shape, the clouds, the way it moved. They wrote things down. When I hesitated, trying to remember if the edges were sharp or soft, the taller one leaned forward slightly. "Take your time," he said. "This is where people usually get confused." That made it worse. They asked about the color, the size, the direction it went. Every time I said, "I think," or "maybe," they underlined something in the notebook. "Did it make a sound?" the shorter one asked. "No." "Did you feel anything unusual?" "No." "Any missing time?" "No." They seemed satisfied with that. Finally I said, "If the photo doesn't exist, why are you here?" The taller one closed the notebook. Because you're close to an age where imagination becomes documentation. That doesn't mean anything. He smiled. It will. They told me I hadn't done anything wrong, that I didn't need to worry, that I should keep taking pictures of normal things. Before they left, the shorter man set my camera back on the desk. It's a good device, he said. Reliable. They walked out together. I watched from the window as they got into the sedan. I didn't hear the engine start. The car just moved. I went back to my room and picked up the camera. It was warm, not like it had been in the sun, warm like it had just been used for a long time. I checked the memory card. No photos, no empty slots, nothing. That night, I drove back up to the turnout. The sky looked normal. Clouds where clouds should be. I took one picture anyway. When I got home, it was gone. I found the card when I opened my car door to leave for work. It was tucked into the rubber seal, right where the window met the frame. At first, I thought it was a parking ticket or some flyer someone had shoved in there overnight. I pulled it out without looking and tossed it onto the passenger seat. It didn't slide. It just landed flat, like it had weight. I live in a small coastal town in Oregon, like the kind where fog rolls in without warning and everything smells like wet wood. That morning, the fog was thick enough that I couldn't see the end of my driveway. It was quiet in that way that feels staged, like the sound was turned down too far. I sat in the car for a second before starting it and looked at the card. It was plain white. No logo, no color. Just a name in black text and a job title underneath. Caleb Morris Field Liaison. That was it. No company name, no address, just a phone number at the bottom. The card stock was stiff and clean, like it had come straight from a printer. No smudges, no fingerprints. I turned it over, blank. I wouldn't have thought much of it if it hadn't been for the night before. I'd been driving home along the coastal road just after dusk. The ocean was on my right, dark and flat, and the fog was starting to move in from the water. I remember slowing down because the visibility dropped fast, like someone had pulled a curtain. That was when I saw the light. It wasn't bright, not a beam or anything dramatic, just a soft glow hovering low over the water, a little offshore. It moved slowly, parallel to the road, keeping pace with my car. No sound, no reflection on the waves. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds, trying to decide what it could be. Boat didn't make sense. Drone didn't either. It stayed too steady, too smooth. Then it stopped. Just stopped moving, like it had hit an invisible wall. I kept driving. When I looked back in the mirror, it was gone. I hadn't told anyone. I went home, made dinner, watched something stupid on TV, and went to bed. Now the card sat on my passenger seat like it had been waiting. I took it inside with me instead of going to work. I told myself I'd just call in sick and deal with it later. Inside the house, everything looked normal. My keys were where I'd left them. The windows were locked, no signs anyone had been there. I set the card on the kitchen counter and stared at it while the coffee brewed. Field Liaison. For what? I typed the name into my phone. Nothing useful came up. No LinkedIn, no business listing. The number on the card wasn't attached to anything public either. After about 10 minutes of going back and forth, I decided to call it, mostly because I wanted it to stop sitting there. I picked up my phone, stepped into the living room, and dialed. It rang once. Then I heard ringing behind me. Not from my phone, from inside the house. I froze, phone still at my ear, and listened. The sound was coming from down the hallway, from my bedroom. I hung up and stood there, heart pounding, listening to the ringing stop. I walked slowly down the hall. Every step felt too loud. The bedroom door was open. My nightstand drawer was closed. The ringing started again. I pulled the drawer open. My old landline phone was inside. I hadn't used it in years. I only kept it plugged in because the internet company told me to. I couldn't remember the last time it rang. It stopped as soon as I looked at it. I unplugged it from the wall and stood there for a while, holding it like it might start up again. When I went back to the kitchen, the card was still on the counter. I didn't call the number again. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I didn't answer it right away. I looked through the peephole. 2 men stood on my porch. They were dressed almost the same. Dark jackets, dark pants. One was taller, thin, with sharp features and hair parted neatly. The other was shorter, broader, with a rounder face and a calm expression that didn't change when he noticed the peephole shadow. I opened the door partway, chain still on. Yes? The taller one smiled. Good afternoon, you're Mara. Yes, I'm Caleb, he said. This is my associate. The other man nodded once. I felt a tightness in my chest. How did you get my name? You left us a voicemail, Caleb said. I didn't. He tilted his head slightly. You attempted to contact us. I shook my head. I dialed a number, that's it. That counts, he said gently. I asked what they wanted. To clarify a misunderstanding, the shorter man said. About what? The light you saw last night, Caleb said. I didn't answer. We're not here to accuse you of anything, he continued. We just want to make sure we're all on the same page. I asked for ID. Caleb smiled in a way that felt practiced. That won't help. I noticed then that neither of them had bags or folders or anything in their hands. They just stood there, relaxed, like they had all the time in the world. How did you get my phone number? I asked. You gave it to us, the shorter man said. I absolutely did not, he nodded. Not directly. I told them they needed to leave. Caleb glanced past me into the house. You unplugged the phone. Yes. That was unnecessary, he said, but understandable. I slammed the door and locked it. I stood there listening, expecting another knock. It didn't come. When I finally looked out the window, the porch was empty. No footprints on the damp boards, no car in the driveway or on the street. That evening, I went back out to my car. The card was gone. I checked the door seal, the seats, the floor. Nothing. I slept with the lights on that night. The next morning, the fog was gone. The ocean looked normal. I drove to work like nothing had happened. I didn't see the light again. Sometimes when my phone rings at home, I wait a second before answering, just to make sure it's not ringing somewhere else too. They caught me at the end of my route, right where the pavement turns to gravel and the signal drops. It was late afternoon, that flat orange light you get before sunset when everything looks tired. I just dropped the last bundle into the outgoing bin at the small cluster of boxes near the feed store. I was already thinking about getting home before dark, maybe grilling something if the weather held. That's when the black sedan pulled up behind my truck. I noticed it because nobody ever came down that road unless they had a reason. No houses, no businesses, just fields and a few barns set way back. The car stopped a few yards behind me, engine still running, no radio, no music. Two men got out. They didn't hurry, but they didn't linger either, walked up like they'd timed it. I stayed where I was, one foot still on the step of my truck. Afternoon, the taller one said. He had a narrow face, dark hair combed flat, and a smile that showed up fast and stayed too long. The other man stood half a step behind him. Shorter, broader, round face. He smiled too, but his eyes kept drifting like he was watching the fields on both sides of the road at once. Can I help you? I asked. Yes, the taller one said. We're following up on a delivery issue. I nodded automatically. You'll need to call the office. We already did, the shorter one said. They suggested we speak with you directly. That didn't sound right, but I didn't argue yet. The taller man pulled out a small notebook. No logo, no badge, just paper. We're looking for a package that was delivered on your route last Thursday, he said. Marked as delivered, but not received. I frowned. You've got the wrong guy. I don't mark anything delivered unless it goes in a box or I hand it off. Yes, he said. That's why we're here. What address? I asked. He gave me a rural route number that technically existed but hadn't been active in years. The kind of thing you only knew if you'd worked out here a long time. There's no delivery point there, I said. Hasn't been for a while. The shorter man nodded, like that confirmed something. And you're certain you didn't deliver a package there anyway? There's nowhere to put it, I said. No box, no house. The taller man smiled wider. Could you describe the package? I can't describe something that doesn't exist. He wrote that down. I felt a prickle of irritation then. Look, if something was misdelivered, you need to... It wasn't misdelivered, the shorter man said gently. It was logged correctly. That doesn't make sense. It often doesn't, he said. I asked who they were with. Records, the taller man said. Postal inspection? I asked. He hesitated just long enough that I noticed. Adjacent. That word again. Adjacent. I crossed my arms. You got names? Badges? The shorter man smiled. That won't help? I laughed once, sharp. It absolutely will. Instead of answering, the taller man flipped his notebook around. There was my name on the page, my employee number, my route, even my start date, written neatly like it had been copied from a form. You've been very consistent, he said. That's appreciated. Consistent with what? With not seeing things that aren't there. I didn't like the way he said that. Describe your route last Thursday, the shorter man said. Anything unusual? No. Any delays? No. Any deviations? No. They nodded in sync. The shorter man looked out toward the fields. Did you notice anything on the road? Lights? Vehicles stopped where they shouldn't have been? No. Any boxes without labels? The taller one added. No. Any address that felt incomplete? I stared at him. What does that even mean? He smiled again, like I'd asked a good question. Then you're confident, the shorter man said, that no such package existed. Yes, I said, I'm sure. The taller man closed the notebook. Good, good, I repeated. Yes, he said. Thank you for confirming. They stepped back toward their car. Then it's still loose, the shorter man said casually, like he was talking about a dog that had slipped a leash. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. What's loose? They didn't answer. They got back into the sedan. No door slams, no engine noise change. The car just eased forward, turned around where there wasn't really room to, and headed back the way it came. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the gravel settle. When I got home that night, I checked my route logs. Everything was normal. No missing scans, no flagged deliveries, but there was an entry I didn't remember making. A scan time-stamped Thursday afternoon, logged at a location that didn't exist anymore. No address, just coordinates. Status marked delivered. I didn't report it. A week later, one of the old barns down that road burned down overnight. No cause found. Nothing inside worth stealing. Sometimes when I'm driving that stretch near the end of my route, I catch myself slowing down, checking the mirrors, half expecting to see a black sedan waiting patiently behind me. So far, I haven't. I made the joke around 1:12 a.m., right after the weather break. It was one of those throwaway lines you say when you've been talking into a mic for 4 hours straight and your brain's running on fumes. Someone had called in about lights they'd seen over the foothills, swore they'd hovered and then dropped straight down behind a ridge. I did the usual thing, asked a couple questions, thanked them, moved on. As I was cueing the next song, I laughed and said, well, if the men in black show up, tell them we're closed for the night. I remember it because my producer, Jenna, snorted through the glass and shook her head at me. The show ended at 2. I signed off, shut down my mic, and went home like normal. Didn't think about it again. The next night was colder. Early winter, dry snow piling up along the sidewalks outside the station. The parking lot was half empty when I got there just before midnight. Our station wasn't big. Local AM talk radio, mostly insomniacs, truckers, and people who liked hearing a human voice while the rest of the world slept. Jenna was already in the control room when I arrived, hunched over her console with a coffee she wasn't going to finish. Anything weird tonight? I asked, hanging my jacket. She glanced up. Other than Rick calling twice to complain about chemtrails again? No. I laughed, put my headphones on, and went live at midnight. The first hour was normal. Calls, music, weather. I joked about the snow, took a call from a guy named Brian, who swore his dog refused to go outside because of something in the sky. Same old stuff. Around 12:58, right before the top of the hour break, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Our studio had a fixed camera mounted above the soundboard for streaming. The frame caught me at the mic and part of the guest chair to my left. Anything else was off camera. I glanced left and saw 2 silhouettes sitting in the dark. At first, I thought they were reflections, or that my eyes were adjusting wrong. I blinked, looked again. 2 men sat in the guest chairs. They hadn't been there a minute earlier. They were dressed the same. Dark suits, dark ties, white shirts. Not flashy, not outdated. Just blank. Both sat upright, hands resting flat on their thighs, facing forward. Neither looked at me. I felt my voice hitch mid-sentence. I covered it by clearing my throat and kept talking, eyes forward, heart suddenly hammering. I hit the music cue early and leaned toward the glass. Jenna, I said quietly, mic muted. Who are they? She frowned at me. Who are who? I pointed slightly with my eyes. She leaned to the side, trying to see past the camera angle, then shook her head. There's nobody in there with you. I looked back. They were still there. One of them turned his head toward me, just enough that I could see his face. He was smiling, not wide, not friendly, just held there, like a placeholder. The song ended. I brought the mic back up, hands sweating, trying to sound normal. "We're back," I said. "You're listening to Nightline." The men didn't move, didn't blink as far as I could tell. They didn't acknowledge the mic light or the music or my voice at all. I took a caller. A woman talking about strange interference on her radio. Her voice crackled in and out. As she spoke, the shorter man tilted his head slightly like he was listening to something else layered over the sound. When the caller hung up, I said, half joking, half not, "You know, some nights it feels like we've got company in here." Jenna shot me a look through the glass and made a cut-it-out gesture. The taller man finally spoke. Not into a mic, just quietly from his chair. "You shouldn't joke about that," he said. His voice was calm, even, perfectly clear. The meters didn't move. His voice didn't go out over the air. I stared at him. "You're distracting the broadcast," the shorter one added, still smiling. I muted my mic again. "Who are you?" I whispered. They both looked at me then. Their eyes were dark, reflective in the low studio light. "We didn't schedule this," the taller one said. "You did." "I didn't invite anyone," I said. "Yes," he replied. "You did." I shook my head. "Jenna says you're not even here." "That's her perspective," the shorter one said. "Yours is different." Through the glass, Jenna was staring at me now, concerned. She tapped her headset and mouthed, "Are you okay?" I nodded automatically. The taller man leaned forward slightly. "Last night you referenced us. It was a joke." "Language is rarely just a joke," he said. I felt cold, even under the studio lights. "You mentioned us during an active broadcast?" The shorter one said. "That creates overlap." "Overlap with what?" They exchanged a glance. "Awareness," the taller one said. I swallowed. "What do you want?" "To observe," he said, "and to suggest restraint." The shorter man gestured toward the mic. "You speculate creatively, sometimes accurately." "That's my job," I said. "It doesn't have to include us," he replied. I glanced at the clock, 1:34 a.m. Still half an hour left in the show. "If I ask you to leave," I said, "will you?" The taller man smiled a little more. "After the segment." The next song started automatically. I hadn't hit the button. The men sat through it without moving. When it ended, the shorter one spoke again. "Your producer is becoming anxious." I looked through the glass. Jenna was on the phone now, turned slightly away, voice low. "Security, probably." "You won't see us leave," the taller man said. "That would complicate things." "I don't want you here," I said. "That's fine," he replied. "We're nearly done." The studio lights flickered once, not off, just a dip, like a breath. The taller man stood, the shorter followed. They straightened their jackets in perfect unison. "Please avoid continued references," the taller one said. "It draws attention." "To what?" I asked. He paused like he was considering whether to answer. "To things that prefer not to be named," he said. They stepped backward out of the camera's edge and then further into a part of the room that didn't exist. Not darkness, just absence. One moment they were there, the next, the chairs were empty. The song ended. Dead air. "Talk," Jenna hissed through my headset. I brought the mic up, voice shaking just enough that I hoped it sounded like fatigue. "You're listening to Nightline," I said. "We'll be right back." After the show, Jenna came into the studio, pale. "Who were you talking to?" she asked. "Nobody," I said. "There was nobody in here," she said. I checked the hallway. Security checked the building. No sign anyone came in. I nodded. The next day, the station manager asked me why there were 2 additional chairs listed on the studio inventory report for that night. I stopped joking about Men in Black after that. Sometimes when the studio's quiet and the mic is live, I feel like I'm not alone, even when every chair is empty. I was making tea when the doorbell rang. It was a little after 9, raining steadily, the kind of rain that softened everything and made the streetlights glow. I remember checking the stove first, because I wasn't expecting anyone, and my first thought was that I'd let the kettle boil too long and set off something by accident. The bell rang again. Same rhythm. Not impatient. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 shapes standing close together on the porch. I opened the door partway. 2 men stood there, both wearing dark jackets that looked dry despite the rain. One was taller, thin, with a long face and neatly parted hair. The other was shorter, broader, with a rounder face and a soft, polite smile. They looked like they'd coordinated without trying to look identical. "Good evening," the taller one said. Miss Harper? Yes, I said. Can I help you? We're here to follow up on a report you made, the shorter one said gently. My stomach tightened. A report to who? He smiled, reassuring. About the light you saw. I hesitated. I'd called the non-emergency line 2 nights earlier. I'd told the woman who answered that I'd seen something hovering above the tree line behind my house. I'd been clear that I didn't know what it was and that it might have been nothing. She'd taken my information and said someone might follow up. I hadn't expected this. I already said everything I know, I said, and it was probably nothing. That's right, the taller man said. That's exactly what we're here to confirm. I should have closed the door. Instead, I opened it wider and stepped back. They didn't rush in. They waited until I gestured, then entered together, moving like they'd done it many times before. The rain sound cut off when the door closed. The house felt quieter than it should have. Would you like us to take our shoes off? The shorter man asked. No, I said quickly. That's fine. They stood in my living room, hands relaxed at their sides, looking around without appearing curious. Noticing, but not reacting. You live alone, the taller man said. Yes. And you've been here about 4 years, the shorter one added. Yes, I said again, more sharply this time. Why are you here? To help you feel at ease, the taller man said. I crossed my arms. I already do. He nodded. Of course. They asked me to describe what I'd seen. I told them again, standing at the kitchen window, the rain, the light hovering just above the trees, pale, steady, not moving like a plane or helicopter, no sound. It was probably a reflection, I said, or a drone. That's very likely, the shorter man said. You'd be surprised how often that happens. The taller one added, our eyes fill in gaps, especially at night. I felt myself relaxing despite everything. Their voices were calm, even, not dismissive, not rushed. They nodded at the right moments, didn't interrupt. You didn't feel frightened, the shorter man said. I mean, I said, it was strange, but no, just confusing. That's normal, he said. Confusion often comes first. They told me that nothing unusual had been recorded in the area. No aircraft, no weather phenomena, no reports from other residents. That doesn't mean you imagined it, the taller man said quickly, like he was correcting himself. Just that it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, I frowned. Those sound like the same thing, he smiled. They overlap. They asked if I'd noticed anything else since. Sounds, dreams, gaps in time. No, I said. Everything's been normal. That's good, the shorter one said. That's what we want. I offered them tea out of habit. They both declined at the same time. They stood there for a few more minutes asking gentle questions, reinforcing the same idea from different angles. That whatever I'd seen wasn't real in the way I thought it was. That my brain had tried to make sense of something ordinary and ended up with something strange instead. It happens more than people realize, the taller man said, especially to people who pay attention. I don't think of myself that way, I said. He smiled again. You do. Eventually, the conversation slowed. The shorter man glanced at the clock on the wall, then nodded to his partner. We won't take up any more of your time, the taller one said. We just wanted to make sure you were comfortable. I am, I said. That's good, he said. Then our job is done. They walked to the door together. I followed, mostly out of politeness, partly because I wanted to make sure they actually left. The shorter man paused on the threshold. If you notice anything else, he said, you don't need to report it. I blinked. Why not? Because you already understand, he said gently. They stepped out into the rain. I watched from the doorway as they walked down my front path. I didn't hear their footsteps. I didn't see where they went once they passed beyond the porch light. I locked the door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The house felt normal again, warm, familiar. I went back to the kitchen and poured the tea I'd forgotten about. It had gone cold. It wasn't until later, lying in bed, replaying the conversation in my head, that something started to feel off. They'd told me over and over that what I saw wasn't real. They'd explained it calmly, comfortingly. But they'd never said they weren't there. They'd never said they weren't real. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the rain fade, and tried not to think about how careful they'd been with their words. They asked me to look at the drawing before they said why they were there. It was mid-morning, cold but clear, the kind of winter day where the light feels thin. I'd just come back from checking the fence line behind my place when I saw the car parked by the mailbox. Black sedan, engine off. No one inside. That wasn't unusual by itself, but it had been backed in perfectly, tires aligned with the edge of the gravel like someone had measured it. I was still standing there when the two men stepped out from behind it. I didn't hear doors open. 1 second the car was empty, the next they were there. Coats buttoned, hands relaxed at their sides. "Mr. Keene," the taller one said, "thank you for taking the time." "I didn't agree to anything," I said. He smiled like that was fine. "We won't take much." They didn't ask to come inside. They just stood there in the driveway, cold air fogging my breath while theirs stayed clear. The shorter man held out a folder, not toward me yet, just visible enough that I could see the edge of a sheet of paper inside. "We're following up on an incident," he said, "from several years ago." I already knew which one. I'd been trying not to think about it for years, not because it was traumatic or dramatic, but because it was slippery. Every time I went back to it, pieces felt thinner, like they'd been rubbed smooth. "I already talked to someone back then," I said. "Yes," the taller man said, "we have that record." That made my stomach tighten. The shorter man finally held the folder out to me. "We'd like you to look at something." I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a sketch, pencil on white paper, careful lines shaded lightly. Not a kid's drawing, not something rushed. It showed a shape hovering above a ridgeline, long and flattened, wider than it was tall. No wings, no markings, just form. My throat went dry. "I didn't draw this," I said. "No," the taller man said. "You described it." I stared at the sketch longer than I should have. It felt familiar in the same way a word does when it's on the tip of your tongue. Not wrong, just incomplete. "That looks like," I started. "Yes," the shorter man said. I shook my head. "I don't know. I can't tell." They both watched my face closely, not my eyes, like they were waiting for something specific to happen. "This is what you reported seeing," the taller one said. "Late fall, mountain trail, snow starting to come down." I remembered that much. Hiking back toward the car later than I'd planned, the sky going that deep blue-gray that comes right before a storm, feeling watched without knowing why. "You said it was silent," the shorter man added. "Low. Close enough that you thought you could hit it with a rock." I swallowed. "I might have said that." "You were very clear at the time," the taller man said. I looked back at the drawing. The longer I stared, the less certain I felt. "I don't remember details," I said. "It's been a long time." "How did it move?" the shorter man asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it. "I don't know." "Did it rotate?" "I don't know." "Did it cast a shadow?" "I don't remember." The taller man's smile faded slightly. "Try," he said, not unkindly. "This matters." I felt a flash of irritation. "It mattered then. Nobody cared. You asked your questions, wrote things down, and left." "That's true," he said. "And we apologize for the delay." "For what?" He didn't answer. I handed the folder back. "I can't help you. Whatever I saw, it's gone." The shorter man took the folder, but didn't close it. He studied the drawing himself, like he was comparing it to something internal. "That's not supposed to fade," he said quietly. The taller man glanced at him. He looked up at me again. "Memory degrades, yes, but not like this." "I'm not lying," I said. "We don't think you are," the taller man said. "That's the problem." A wind moved through the trees behind the house, stirring snow off the branches. For a second, the sound pulled at something in my head. A sense of scale, of being very small. "Can you tell us anything else?" the shorter man asked. "Even a feeling." I closed my eyes. For a moment there was pressure, not pain, just awareness, like standing too close to a speaker. Then it slipped away. "I felt like it was waiting," I said finally. "Not for me, just waiting." They both nodded. "That matches," the taller man said. I opened my eyes. "Matches what?" He closed the folder. "Earlier accounts." They thanked me then, polite, sincere, like I'd helped more than I realized. Before they left, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest the whole time. "Why come back now?" The taller man paused. "Because time passed," he said. The shorter man added, "and because some things shouldn't be forgotten this easily." They walked back to the car. Again, I didn't hear the doors. The sedan rolled away without throwing gravel. I stood in the driveway long after they were gone. That night, I dreamed of the trail. The snow, the way the trees had gone quiet all at once. When I woke up, there was a shape in my head I couldn't quite hold on to, like a shadow behind my eyes. It faded before I could look at it too closely. It happened on a Tuesday evening in early November. I was heading home from work on the Route 217 bus that runs from downtown Portland out toward Tigard. It was already dark by 5:05, that heavy kind of darkness that settles early when the air smells like rain and everything feels half asleep. The bus was half full. A couple of high school kids, an older woman with groceries, one guy in a construction vest scrolling on his phone. I had my earbuds in but wasn't really listening to anything. Around the edge of town, where the route passes a patch of trees near Fano Creek, I looked out the window and saw this light moving above the tree line. It wasn't like a plane or a helicopter. It was smaller and closer, maybe a couple 100 feet up. No sound, no flashing markers. It darted left, stopped, then shot straight up like it was yanked on a string. It stayed there for maybe 3 seconds before it just went out. Not faded, went out like someone flipped a switch. A few people on the bus were looking too. I saw the older woman lean closer to the window. The guy in the vest pointed and said something to the driver, who didn't even slow down. Nobody said much after that. The rest of the ride was quiet. I got off at my usual stop near 99W and walked home. The next morning was gray and wet, typical Oregon winter weather. I took the same bus, same time, same stop. When I got on, 2 men were sitting together near the back. They were both wearing black suits, not coats, not rain jackets, actual suits with black ties and white shirts. No hats, no umbrellas, no briefcases. Both had pale skin, short dark hair, and the same sort of build. Average, but stiff, like they weren't used to sitting still. At first, I thought maybe they were co-workers or detectives or something, but there was something off about them. Their suits looked too crisp, like they'd just come from the tailor, but the collars were slightly uneven, like they didn't know how to wear them. Neither one moved or spoke. They just stared straight ahead, eyes fixed on the same point somewhere near the front of the bus. I sat a few rows ahead of them, trying not to stare. Every time I glanced back, they were in the same exact position, not talking, not checking their phones. When the bus stopped for passengers, they didn't turn their heads. They didn't even blink as far as I could tell. I remember thinking maybe they were part of some performance art thing, or maybe undercover transit security, but that didn't make sense either. No badges, no radios. When the bus got to my stop near the hospital, I stood up and walked toward the door. As I passed them, I noticed both were wearing identical black shoes. Polished, spotless, no visible brand or stitching. I didn't think much of it until I stepped off and realized they'd stood up too. I glanced back through the window as the bus pulled away. They were standing in the aisle facing the door, not looking out, just standing like they were waiting for something. I started walking toward work. Halfway down the block, I heard the hiss of the bus pulling away behind me. Then footsteps. Slow, steady, like someone matching my pace about half a block back. I turned once, quickly. No one there. The sidewalk was empty. That whole day, I felt off, like something was sitting just behind my shoulder. Every time the automatic door opened in the office, I half expected to see them walk in. That evening, I took an Uber home instead of the bus. I didn't tell anyone why. I just said it was raining too hard. When I got to my stop, I looked down the street and saw 2 black sedans parked about 50 feet apart on opposite sides of the road, both running, headlights on. Nobody inside that I could see. I went inside, locked the door, and sat for a while without turning on the lights. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I took a later bus, thinking maybe the timing would be different. But when it pulled up, there they were again. Back row, same seats, same suits. I froze for a second before getting on. The driver looked at me like I was taking too long, so I forced myself to sit near the middle. The 2 men didn't move, didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. About 10 minutes into the ride, the bus hit a stoplight near a construction zone. I looked back again. Both of them had turned their heads slightly, in unison, toward my side of the bus. Not directly at me, just angled, the same degree, same motion. Then, when the light turned green, they faced forward again. No one else seemed to notice. When I got to my stop, I got off quickly and started walking fast toward the corner. I wanted to turn and see if they followed, but was scared to make it obvious. At the next crosswalk, I risked a glance over my shoulder. They weren't there. The bus was already pulling away. I scanned the sidewalk, the shops, the parking lot. Nothing. They were gone. I didn't see them again for a few days, but strange things started happening after that. One morning, I found my back gate unlatched, even though I always keep it locked. Another night, my motion sensor light kept flickering on, even though there was no wind and no movement. Then, one evening, I came home and found a business card tucked into the crack of my front door. No name, no logo, just a plain white card with a phone number printed in black ink. The number had a local area code, but nothing else. I didn't call it. I threw it in the trash and tried to forget about it. 2 nights later, around 11 p.m., someone knocked on my door. 3 short knocks. When I looked through the peephole, no one was there. My front yard was empty, the street quiet. But as I turned away, I saw the faint reflection of headlights moving slowly past my house, then stopping for a few seconds before driving off. I slept with the light on after that. About a week later, I was waiting for the bus again, trying to convince myself I was just overreacting. The morning was foggy, visibility maybe 30 feet. When the bus pulled up, it was almost empty, except for 2 people sitting in the back. Same suits, same blank faces. I stepped back, pretending to check my phone, and let the bus leave without me. The driver honked once, annoyed, but I couldn't move. I stood there until the sound of the engine faded into the fog. I called in sick that day and walked home. No cars followed. No strange notes, no knocks, just quiet. Since then, I've switched routes. I drive more often now. Haven't seen them again, but I still check the rearview mirror when I stop at lights, half expecting to see those 2 faces reflected behind me, still expressionless, waiting. And sometimes, when the weather turns foggy in the mornings, I catch myself staring at the tree line along 99W, watching for that same darting light. It never shows up, but I can't stop looking. I was living outside of Sedona at the time, a small rental cabin near Oak Creek, just off one of those dirt roads where GPS barely works and cell service drops out after a few bends. It wasn't anything fancy, just one room, a wood stove, and a tiny kitchen. I was working remote and spent most evenings hiking the canyons after work. This happened in late August, around 8 p.m. Still warm, but the sun had dipped low enough that the air had that dry, cool smell you only get in the desert. I'd taken my usual route along Cathedral Trail, just me and my camera. I liked shooting time lapses of sunsets. I wasn't some influencer or anything, it was just a hobby. Halfway through the trail, there's a lookout point that faces east across a canyon. That's where I saw it. It started as a single bright light, moving too fast to be slow, a plane, but too slow to be a meteor. I figured maybe it was a drone, but it was high. Way above where you'd fly one. It changed direction 3 times in under a minute. I pulled out my phone and started recording. It moved in these sharp, deliberate angles, like someone dragging a cursor across the sky. Then it just stopped, completely still for about 5 seconds, and shot straight upward until it vanished. I stood there a while waiting for it to come back, but the sky was empty again. When I got home, I uploaded the clip to my laptop. The video was grainy, but you could still see it, that weird, perfect motion. I posted it on a hiking forum I use sometimes, just to see if anyone else had seen it. I didn't put my full name, no address, nothing that could trace back to me. Just saw this above Oak Creek tonight. Anyone know what it is? The post got a few comments before I went to bed. Mostly jokes, 1 or 2 people saying satellite flare or drone swarm. I didn't think much more about it. Around 7:30 the next morning, I heard someone knock on the cabin door. I almost didn't answer because no one ever came out there. The mailman left packages by the gate and I didn't really have neighbors, but the knocking came again, steady and slow. When I opened the door, there were 2 men standing there, both in black suits, white shirts, black ties. It looked wrong against the red dirt and sun-bleached trees. Their shoes were spotless, not a speck of dust on them. The taller one smiled and said, "Good morning, Mr. Heller. We're with the Department of Atmospheric Studies. May we come in for a moment?" Heller's my last name, but I never used it online. I hadn't told anyone about the video except for the post. I asked how they found me, and the shorter one said, "Your post was flagged for review. We're just conducting some follow-up." His voice was quiet but clipped, like he was reading from a script. They didn't wait for an invitation. They just stepped inside, both of them moving in perfect sync. The taller one glanced around the room, eyes flicking over the laptop, the camera bag, the unwashed dishes in the sink. The other one stayed by the door, hands folded in front of him. The tall one asked to see the footage. I said sure, figuring it couldn't hurt. I pulled it up on the laptop and pressed play. He leaned in close, watching every second. When the light shot upward and disappeared, he paused it and stared at the frozen frame. Then he asked, "You didn't see any ground reflection? Any audible disturbance?" I said no. He nodded, turned toward his partner, and said, "Local atmospheric inversion, as expected." The shorter one gave a single nod, no expression. Then the tall one closed the laptop himself, slowly, like he was handling something fragile, and said, "We'll be taking this for review." I told him he couldn't just take my laptop. He smiled again, that same small, tight smile, and said, "We'll return it promptly once it's cleared." I didn't argue. Something about both of them felt wrong. Not threatening exactly, but heavy. Like the air in the room had changed. They thanked me for my cooperation, turned, and walked out. Their black sedan was parked at the end of the dirt drive, spotless despite the dust. They got in and drove away slow, without leaving a single tire mark in the sand. When I checked my watch, it had stopped. The second hand was frozen at 8:42, the exact time I realized when the light had vanished the night before. I tried winding it, shaking it, nothing. I figured maybe it just died, so I set it on the counter and forgot about it. The rest of that day felt off. I kept thinking I heard a car outside or voices down by the creek, but every time I checked, there was nothing. That night, I noticed something else. The video file was gone from my phone too. Not just deleted. Gone, like it had never existed. Even the upload link from the forum was dead. When I tried to open the post, I got a blank page. The next morning, I drove into town to see if the library computers still had my forum post cached. Nothing. It was like it had never been posted. When I got home that afternoon, the laptop was sitting on my porch. No note, no explanation. It was wiped completely clean. New system install, empty hard drive. I decided not to go hiking for a while. 2 nights later, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound outside. Not loud, but steady, like a low hum somewhere between an engine and a power line. It pulsed, soft and rhythmic. I looked out the window, and down the trail that runs behind the cabin, I saw 2 faint figures standing side by side. No flashlights, no movement, just standing there. I watched for maybe a full minute, but they never moved or turned toward me. The sound faded, and when I blinked, they were gone. The next morning, I checked the dirt around the trail. No footprints, no tire marks. That same day, I noticed my watch had started ticking again, same time it stopped before, 8:42. Except now the date had reset itself to August 18th, 1 day earlier than it actually was. I didn't wear it after that. A week later, I finally talked myself into going for another hike. I brought a different camera, one that wasn't connected to my phone or laptop. I didn't see any lights, but halfway up the trail, I found something half buried in the dirt, a small black card, smooth and blank, like a hotel key card. When I picked it up, it was warm to the touch, even though the sun hadn't hit that side of the canyon yet. I left it there. When I got back that night, the clock on my stove was blinking, like the power had gone out, except none of the other appliances were affected. The time flashing on it was 8:42. After that, I started noticing small changes I couldn't explain. My phone's location services would turn on by itself. The porch light would flicker exactly 3 times every night around the same hour. Once, when I was driving back from town, I saw a black sedan parked off the highway shoulder near the turnoff to my road. The windows were tinted. 2 silhouettes sat inside, facing straight ahead. When I passed them, they didn't move. A week after that, a package showed up in my mailbox. No return address, no postage, just a plain box. Inside was my old watch, the one I'd left on the counter weeks earlier. It was ticking again. The second hand was moving backwards. I moved out of the cabin before the lease was up. Left most of my stuff behind. Camera, furniture, the laptop they'd given back. I don't even hike anymore. But the weirdest part came months later. I was staying with my sister near Flagstaff, helping her with her kids. One night she called me into the living room and said, "Hey, weren't you the one who posted that UFO video last summer? Someone on YouTube's talking about it. She showed me her phone. It was my clip. Same canyon, same night sky, same light darting and stopping. But the voice narrating it wasn't mine. It was someone else describing what they saw, word for word the way I'd written my original post. The upload date said August 17th, one day before I even filmed it. It was around 9 on a Sunday night when I first heard the sound. It wasn't loud, more like a low vibration than actual noise. I was in the kitchen rinsing a glass when the windows started to buzz. It reminded me of how the air conditioner used to rattle the frame before I got it fixed, except this wasn't mechanical. It was deeper, steadier, almost like it was coming from the air itself. I turned off the faucet and just stood there, listening. The sound didn't fade. It pulsed, slow and heavy, and I could feel it in my chest more than I could hear it. I stepped out onto the back porch, barefoot, and looked up. The sky was clear, no wind, no stars, just that dull orange haze from the streetlights. The hum got stronger as soon as I opened the door. It was coming from above the house. At first, I thought it was a helicopter flying low, but there were no lights, no movement, no rotor sound. It was just this smooth, perfect tone hanging in the air. I walked out into the yard, my phone already in my hand. When I pointed the camera upward, the sound seemed to dip in pitch, not fade, just shift slightly lower, like it was reacting to me. Then I saw it, a dark shape directly above the roof. Not quite circular, not quite triangular, more like a smooth, flat disc with soft edges. The surface didn't reflect anything, even with the porch light on. It was like it absorbed the glow. I started recording, but I couldn't see much through the phone. The screen just showed darkness, with a faint blur where the thing was. I zoomed in, and right then, the hum stopped. The silence afterward was thick. I don't know how else to say it. It was like all the background noise of the night got sucked out. No crickets, no cars, nothing. And in that silence, it disappeared. Not like it sped off. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. Just gone. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, trying to figure out what I'd just seen when I heard footsteps. I turned toward the front of the house, thinking maybe one of the neighbors had seen it too. 2 men were walking up my driveway. They looked out of place right away. Both wore black suits, not the kind people wear to work, but those perfectly tailored ones you only see on TV. Black shoes, black ties, white shirts. No jackets or hats, but everything else matched. Their clothes looked brand new, like they'd just come out of plastic wrap. One of them was taller than the other, with slicked back hair that didn't move at all. The shorter one had pale skin and this oddly smooth face, like he didn't have pores. "Evening," the tall one said in a calm, neutral voice. "Did you happen to hear anything unusual just now?" I froze halfway between the yard and the porch steps. I didn't think they could have seen me filming. My phone was still in my hand, screen off. But the question felt pointed. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe a plane or something?" They both looked up at the sky for a second, then back at me, perfectly in sync. The shorter one spoke next. "We've had reports of a mechanical disturbance in the area. Nothing to be concerned about, we're just following up." His tone was polite, but his mouth didn't really move right when he talked. The words came out smoothly, but his expression stayed flat, almost like the sound wasn't connected to him. I asked if they were from the county or maybe an air base nearby. They didn't answer right away. Then the tall one said, "We're with a federal response unit, Noise Abatement Division." I remember thinking that didn't sound real. They stepped closer, and I took a small step back toward the porch. The tall one smiled, or tried to. It looked practiced. "Did you record anything? Sometimes people do without realizing it." I lied and said no. He nodded, still smiling that off smile. Behind him, I noticed their car at the end of the driveway. I hadn't heard it pull up. It was a black sedan, the kind you'd see government agents driving in an old movie. No headlights on, no sound from the engine, and I couldn't make out any plates. The shorter one looked around the yard, then at the roof, like he was scanning. He didn't tilt his head, just turned his eyes slowly from side to side. After a moment, he said, "Everything seems normal now." They both turned back to me. "Thank you for your time," the tall one said. "If you hear the sound again, do not investigate. Contact your local authorities." I nodded, and they both started walking back toward the car. The tall one stopped halfway down the driveway and looked over his shoulder. "You should delete any videos you took tonight," he said quietly. "Sometimes these things carry interference." Then they got in the car. I swear to God, it didn't make a sound when it started. The headlights didn't come on. They just rolled backward out of the driveway, completely silent, and turned down the street. I stood there until they were gone, my heart pounding. When I finally looked down, the video was still on my phone. It showed the night sky, blurry and dark, and a faint hum in the background. Quieter than I remembered, but there. Then, right at the end, two shapes appeared at the edge of the frame, walking toward the house. The timestamp said 9:08 p.m. But when I checked the clock on my stove, it was 9:43. I didn't remember standing outside that long. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking I heard that low hum again, faintly, like it was vibrating through the walls. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see that black car idling by the curb. The next morning, I went out to check for tire marks in the driveway. There weren't any. Not even footprints. Later that afternoon, when I opened my phone, the video was gone. Not corrupted or deleted, just gone from the gallery. I checked the cloud backup too. Nothing. That evening, a black envelope was sitting on my porch. No postage, no writing, just sealed shut. Inside was a single blank sheet of paper. That's when I stopped trying to figure it out. I stopped telling people to. My sister said it sounded like a dream. My coworker said it was probably a drone. But sometimes, late at night, the air starts to buzz again. Low and deep. And I catch myself standing at the window, waiting for it to stop. It always does, eventually. And every time it does, the neighborhood goes completely still, like everything's holding its breath. I never go outside anymore when that happens. Not since that night. Because the last thing I saw before it vanished wasn't the aircraft. It was the reflection in the kitchen window, showing two men standing at the end of the driveway watching the house, perfectly still in the dark. They arrived the first night I was alone at the cabin. I had driven down the coast to get away from the city, a week with a sketchbook and a cheap space heater, nothing fancy. And by the third night, I was halfway through a thermos of coffee and thinking the whole thing had been a good idea. The cliff above the little beach was maybe 100 yards from the door, a carved-out notch of dark rock and dune grass that dropped straight into a slice of sand. I'd been watching the tide come and go all afternoon, and when the light died, the place went to that hollow, winded kind of quiet you only get when there's no one else for miles. I was getting the wood stove going when I saw them. Two figures on the bluff, standing perfectly still and looking out at the ocean. At first I thought they were watching the water like any other people. Tide, seal, something. Then I realized they weren't bundled up. Not that kind of bundled up. They were in suits. Dark suits, white shirts. Nothing like the fleece and parkas I'd packed. Their shoes caught the last light and didn't have any grit on them. Whoever they were, they might as well have been made out of a different weather. I stepped closer to the sliding glass and then went out to the porch with the mug still warm in my hands, letting the wind take the steam away. The air smelled like salt and old kelp. I called up to them, more out of politeness than anything. "Hey, evening, folks. You get up here okay?" The word left my mouth wet and small in the wind. They didn't move. They didn't move. Not even a blink. One of them leaned. I thought he might turn to look. He didn't. They were both facing the water, shoulders squared as if fixed to watch a long, slow movie. The taller one's hair was close cut and neat in a way that said he didn't do manual work. The shorter one had a face that looked too clean to be my imagination. Nothing in it to tell age or habit. When I waved my arm, both of them turned their heads at the exact same degree and the exact same speed. It was small and mechanic, like two puppet heads rotating on the same axle. The shorter one cocked his head almost as if trying to hear something across the wind, and then, still not looking at me, the taller one called down in a plain voice, "Do you require assistance?" The word came down like a question, but not exactly. It sounded rehearsed, like a phrase someone had practiced once and kept in a pocket. I told them no, I was fine, thanks. And for the next 10 minutes I hovered on the porch while the wind made the house creak and the gulls argued over a crab. They never spoke again. Every now and then I'd catch them slipping into small mirrored motions, adjusting their jackets in unison, the same slide of hand over lapel, and I felt like I was watching a mirror of myself that didn't reflect what I did. At some point, the fog rolled in thick and fast, like someone had dragged a blanket over the bluff. The men remained silhouettes until they were swallowed. I put the mug down and went back inside, shut the curtain, and tried to tell myself 100 reasonable things. They were private investigators, they were part of a film crew, they had a broken down car and were waiting for a tow. None of it fit the way they were dressed or the way their shoes were spotless in sand. None of it fit the stillness. I slept like a man tuned to a metronome, up for an hour, dozing for an hour. And when I finally roused before dawn, I opened the door to check the tide. The beach was a pale, low place under a sky that hadn't decided if it was going to be rain. The first thing that hit me was how even the sand looked. There was a straight, narrow line leading from the bluff to the cabin door. It was not a trail of footprints, not a tracked, scuffed path. The sand lay flat, compressed in a perfect band, like someone had taken a steamroller through it, but only along a single, tight track. I walked down to it. Up close, the sand was packed and firm where the band was. There were no toe marks, no heel impressions, no disturbance of the grain. If someone had walked that line in shoes, there would be edges and little ridges and drag marks. There was nothing. The sand outside the band showed the wind scribbles and a few gull tracks. The band was pristine and wrong. It ran straight from the lip of the cliff to the bottom step on the porch, ending as though someone had taken a single careful step onto the threshold and then vanished. I checked the bluff. The grass by the edge had not been flattened. The cliff face itself showed the usual gull droppings and brown streaks where rain had run. No prints in the sand up there either. If anybody had come down from that ridge in the night, they'd usually cut a ragged path or leave a trail of footprints in the dune. Not this. The band didn't start at a single point. It seemed to gather itself out of the sand and run like a line someone else had drawn. My first instinct was to call the ranger and file something ridiculous. Someone trespassing on private property at 3 a.m. But I didn't want to make a fuss. The ranger station was hours away in fair weather and unreachable now because the fog made the road slippy. I told myself to take photos and not to be stupid. I went back to the porch, grabbed my phone, and took a long series of shots, making sure the cabin's shadow cut across the band so I could prove where it led. When I looked through the images, the band was clear. There was no discoloration, no footprints. The picture showed the band leading straight to the threshold like a zipper line. After breakfast, cold, eaten standing at the sink, I walked the short road into town. On Main Street, the day felt normal. People getting cups of coffee, the post office window marked with a flyer for the summer concert. I told the owner of the hardware store, a woman named Jan, who shrugged and said things like, coastal towns, you know, and asked if I'd had trouble with raccoons. I laughed, but I felt small. I could say, there were two men on the bluff in suits, and she'd tilt her head and tell me about the new roofing crews. He meant well, but there was that tilt of someone who'd lived near the ocean long enough to not be spooked much. By the time I got back in the afternoon, the wind had turned and the sand was starting to blow soft. I went down to the beach again. The band was still there, like a scar on the grain. I knelt and ran a finger along the edge. It was compacted enough that my fingernail left only a light mark. I dug a little to see if there was anything under it, trash, foil, a footprint embedded, and found nothing but the same compact sand. The rest of the beach had the usual wind lines and the random shell pieces. The band was a thing apart. That evening I got restless and walked up to the bluff, careful where the rocks drop off. The grass there was undisturbed. There were no impressions of boots, no cigarette butts, no bottle caps. A gull skittered past and shrieked. I stood for a long time looking out, thinking maybe I'd see them walk out along the ridge and down, but the horizon stayed quiet and gray. On my way back, I saw a pair of scuffs in the sand at the top of the bluff where two grass blades were bent, like someone had placed a foot there for a moment and thought better of it. Close up, they were nothing. Small impressions, easily produced by a deer or a kid's boot. I couldn't be sure. The last odd thing that week came on a Thursday. I was packing the car to go back to the city. I decided to cut the trip short, partly because sleeping alone felt different after the sand, and partly because I had work piling up, and I noticed the little brass key to the cabin gate was on the kitchen table. It had been hanging on the peg by the door when I left it the first night. I knew I hadn't touched it because I always leave it there when I go out. I don't have an explanation for that. The key was just on the table, clean as the rest of the place. I did what seemed sensible. I took a photo of the band on the beach. I put the key in my pocket. I stopped at the ranger station when the fog let up and told them what I'd found. The ranger listened, then wrote me a note and said they'd send someone by to check on routine. That phrase sounded like something from a bureaucrat who'd seen 100 similar strange nights and filed them away. He asked one simple practical question I hadn't thought about. Did you lock the cabin when you left last night? I said yes. Of course I had. He nodded like that proved something. On the drive north, the fog peeled away as though someone had pulled a curtain back. The radio popped with local weather, the sun was a low coin in the sky, and the little town shrank behind me. I kept glancing at the key in my pocket like it might whisper something. I drove with the windows cracked, the wind picking salt on my face. At a stoplight, a teenager with a dog on the hood yelled something about the score, and I felt the world reasserting itself in the simplest ways. I told a couple of friends when I got home, late and half asleep. They made the polite, interesting noises. One asked if I'd seen men in suits before, a joke because you hear that sort of phrase in whispered stories. I said, no, I hadn't. I don't know what they were. The word that kept popping into my head was watching. But I don't mean watched like someone looking at a house to take something. I mean watched like someone examining the sea. Maybe that's what they were doing. Maybe they weren't human, quite the way human is when you meet them in a grocery store. Maybe I only imagined the line of sand. Maybe the sand compressed because of tide patterns I didn't understand. I go back sometimes, not often. The band in the sand will show up in my head like a page I can't stop turning. The cliff is a place you can stand and feel small and very much in the middle of the world. And what I'll remember is the way two figures looked almost like they belonged on a postcard and almost like they didn't belong anywhere at all. I always check the sand now before I walk barefoot down the steps. I lock the door twice. I leave the light on when I sleep. I tell myself that life is full of little puzzles we can live with, and some of them don't want an answer. I was doing a training run up North Trail, the stretch that splits off from the service road and climbs toward Kingsley Ridge. It was late September, the kind of morning where the trees are half green, half bent toward fall, and the air felt thin even in the valley. I go up there a lot alone. It's 15 miles round trip, lots of steady climbing, and it clears my head better than anything else. That morning, the sky was the clean, hard blue you get after a dry front. I left town before sunrise because I wanted the quiet. The trail was empty at first, as usual, my shoes crunching on the frost-hardened dirt, the distant sound of a creek, the occasional rattle of a marmot. I like those hours when the world hasn't fully warmed up, when you feel the work in your muscles and think about nothing else. I also notice small things, the way light falls through pine and pines, the sounds that change when a storm is coming. I notice when something isn't right. There were a few little oddities before the main thing happened, things I remember because they felt off in that slow, accumulating way dread does. First, the birds went quiet. I mean, just fewer birds, a pocket of silence. 1 minute the slopes were full of that morning chatter, the quick calls and flutter of wings, and then for a stretch of maybe 100 yards, everything stopped. No blackbirds, no jays, not even the tiny insect-sounding chirps. The quiet was thick enough that I heard my breath more than I usually do. Then, about a mile up, my music player, which I'd set to shuffle, started skipping. Not skipping like an audio hiccup, but like it was stuck on the tiny bit of static between tracks. I pulled the earbud out to check, and the player froze on the screen for a second, and then went to the home menu. I shrugged it off as low battery and shoved it back into my pocket. A little farther on, rain clouds I'd watched skittering along the western horizon earlier apparently drifted by. A line of mist rolled through the pines, and the temperature dropped a few degrees like someone turned a dial. I zipped up my jacket and kept going. There was a faint scent I couldn't place. Metallic, like standing too close to a welder, but cleaner and lighter. It came and went with the wind. I passed a horseshoe turn where I usually meet a handful of hikers. That morning, there wasn't a soul. I waved at 3 different empty spots where I swore a jacket or a pack would be, like they'd been erased. At one point, I saw fresh prints that crossed the trail, clear boot marks, big tread like work boots, and I followed them for maybe 20 paces, thinking I might catch up to someone. The prints led to a flat rock and stopped. No prints forward from there, no sign of any path off into the brush, just a dead stop in the sand. The sky overhead had that hard late September light, and I felt oddly exposed, like a tape of the world had been cut. I took a sip of water and tried to make sense of it, telling myself I'd probably just missed the hikers because I'd gone early. The trail does that. Sometimes you get the place when it's hollow, and sometimes it's full. My watch was on, GPS blinking, heartbeat steady. I started up again and felt fine until I rounded a bend and came face to face with 2 men. They were standing in the middle of the path, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, perfectly still. Up close, I could see their clothes were odd for the trail. Black jackets with collars that suggested suits underneath, dark slacks and clean shoes with no scuffing. Not the fleece and orange that hikers wear up there. Not a backpack. Nothing. The taller one had hair cut short, like a service haircut. The other had a lined face and a neutral expression that didn't tell me anything. They weren't looking at each other. They weren't looking at the trees. They were both facing down the path toward the same point where I stood. For a moment, I thought they were just 2 guys who decided to stop there and watch the morning or make a call, so I slowed. I do that out of courtesy all the time on single track. Slow, step to the side, but they didn't move, not an inch, not a blink I could see. They held their posture the way store mannequins hold it, balanced, composed, a little stiff. I said morning because you say that on the trail. They didn't reply. I said it again, louder, and then I realized how absurd that was, talking to strangers who might be ignoring me. I stepped off the trail onto a narrow shoulder to give them room and walked by at a clipped jog so I wouldn't make them think I wanted to get past them too close. As I passed, the taller man's gaze fixed on me with a flatness that made the hair on my forearms stand up. He didn't blink, not a flinch, not a head turn. It felt like slipping through someone's photograph. I was halfway by when a weird thought crossed my head. Their lips seemed to move slightly out of sync with sounds in the air. Not words, exactly, just the micro-motion of mouths like something in the wind. Maybe that was my imagination. Or the angle. Your senses play tricks on you when you're alone in the mountains. I put in another mile and the path started to steepen. I expected when I glanced back over my shoulder to see them standing where I'd left them, but my stomach dropped because the space on the trail was empty. I slowed to a walk and looked down the polished single track. Nothing. No disturbance, no flattened brush, no footprints leading away. It was like they had been removed from the scene. I laughed, softly at myself, half with nervousness, half with embarrassment, and kept going. The sky was edging toward noon and the valley opened up in the distance, the mesas and peaks all crusted with the last of the season's snows. I checked my watch without thinking. It said 10:12. My watch is one of those GPS-enabled things that keeps time off satellites, and my phone had shown 10:12 when I last checked, so I didn't think anything of it. I ran, tried to push the hill because I had a hard run to finish, and the world felt taut and sharp in the way it does when you're properly tired. About 20 minutes later, I stopped at a small outcropping to take a drink and catch my breath. I set my pack down, reached for my watch to log the split, and the little screen blinked at me with 9:10. I blinked back hard enough that the beads of sweat at my temples shivered. 9:10. An hour behind. My stomach clenched the way it does when you misplace your wallet and know you left it on the counter. I laughed out loud, a short startled sound, and smacked the face of the watch. The numbers jumped back to 10:13 like nothing had happened. I don't have a clean explanation for that. The watch is 8 months old, well cared for, and calibrated to satellite time when I sync it. I've dropped it in streams and banged it on rocks. It's been reliable. For weeks, I told myself the display had glitched or that the battery had hiccuped, but there was an hour where the watch and I disagreed about where I had been. I tried to reconstruct it. Did I sit down at a shaded switchback? Did I nap? I could not account for it. When I turned back down the trail toward town, I started seeing small, inexplicable things that fit the pattern of wrong. My phone, which had been at 72% battery when I started, showed 50% after a half hour, even though I hadn't used it. The stream water where I bottle up tasted faintly acidic for a sip and then normal the second time. A pair of hikers going the other way gave me a once-over that felt prolonged. Later, I would realize their eyes flicked toward the section of path I'd passed, and then away, like they'd seen something and decided not to engage. I told one of them, a woman in a blue windbreaker, about the two men when we sat on a bench near the trailhead tying shoes. She listened, face patient, and said, "There's been weird calls into the park this week. People reporting lights, weird phone service drops. I thought it was old-timers blowing smoke." She laughed, and I laughed with her, and we swapped trail notes, but the laugh didn't settle in me the way it usually does after a friendly conversation. At the parking lot, my car was exactly where I'd left it. Tailgate popped and door opened to stuff my shoes. The parking lot was crowded with day hikers filing out from the high meadows, normal life. But I still felt like I'd been through a seam in the world and come out the other side. On the drive home, traffic moved in that anonymous way, radio bouncing between songs and weather. I kept reaching unconsciously to check my watch. It kept the right time then. The phone behaved normally. I went back up a few days later in daylight, with a friend this time. Not to prove anything, but because I wanted to make sense of the jittering cul-de-sac of memory. We walked the stretch where I'd seen them. The place was full of ordinary things. Lichen on rocks, a cracked trail marker, a picnic table someone had carved initials into. No footprints, no marks in the underbrush where two men in decent shoes might have stepped. We did find the boot prints on the flat rock again, dark and pressed into the dirt for no obvious reason, and when my friend crossed to peer at them, he shrugged and said, "Odd man," and kept walking. I asked the ranger about calls. He said they'd had a weird week. A couple who said their watch stopped for a while. A woman who described being followed by a car with two men in it along the highway. A hunter with a story about lights. He didn't connect them into anything because his job is to be both cautious and peacemaker. He tapped a filing cabinet, made note in a small book, and gave me a flyer about proper trail etiquette. I'm not a believer in one thing or another. I am a runner who likes to get lost in the lungs and leg work of it. But I can't shake the texture of that morning. The way the birds paused, the metallic smell in the wind, the two men standing like props, the watch that betrayed me for an hour. Whatever happened on that stretch of trail was small in the record of the world. No headlines, no missing persons, just a little private wrinkle. I went back twice after that, at different times of day with different friends. Nothing else happened. But sometimes when I run by myself now, I pass that horseshoe turn and the world narrows for a moment. I catch myself checking shoulders and sucking in breath on purpose, as if that might steady something. The watch works fine these days, but I still look at it more than I used to, counting the minutes like a man who learned an odd lesson in the middle of a morning run. You can be perfectly certain about where you are and still lose an hour without explanation. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a Thursday night, unusually clear for this part of Colorado, and the air had that brittle, late winter dryness that makes everything sound sharper. I was on my porch with my DSLR snapping photos of the sky. There'd been a light moving over the neighborhood, slow, almost deliberate, darting between houses and over trees. Nothing I recognized. Not a plane, not a satellite, not a helicopter. I got a few decent shots before it blinked out and vanished into the blackness. I put the camera down and went inside, expecting that to be the end of it. But then I noticed headlights across the street. I live on a quiet cul-de-sac, dead end, and seeing a car at that hour was strange, but not impossible. What made it odd was that the car was black, clean, and parked perfectly parallel to the curb, right across from my driveway. It was the kind of alignment that looked almost rehearsed. I squinted from the window. Two men sat inside, suits dark as the car, hands on the steering wheel, facing straight ahead. I didn't see them approach. 1 second the street was empty. The next, the car was there, engine idling softly. I stepped outside, keeping my phone in hand, trying not to make it obvious I was watching them. The air had that stiff, cold bite of February, wind rattling the branches of the bare trees. The men didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. Their faces were obscured by shadows from the roof of the car, but there was something unnerving in the way they sat. Too rigid, like mannequins in an office window. I waved a hand in the air, half in greeting, half in disbelief. Nothing. They didn't even blink, or at least I couldn't tell. I felt stupid standing there, shivering, staring at a pair of strangers who probably weren't even real in the sense I understood. After a few minutes, I went inside, locked the door, and tried to shake it off. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and kept one eye on the street. Nothing happened. No footsteps. No car doors. No noise at all, except the occasional wind whisper. I went to sleep eventually, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Like I was being observed, watched carefully from just across the street. The next morning, I checked my camera. I expected to see at least a few photos of the light. Nothing. Not even the dark sky over the neighborhood. The memory card was blank. I thought maybe I'd deleted them by accident, but I hadn't touched the card since that night. I tried the phone, same deal. The photos were completely gone. Not corrupted, not hidden, just gone. It was like they'd never existed. I went outside to calm myself, walked down to the street where the car had been. Nothing. No tire marks in the asphalt, no footprints in the thin dust along the curb. The street looked like any other suburban morning. I called a neighbor, one I'm friendly with, and asked if they'd seen anything unusual the night before. They hadn't. They hadn't noticed anything at all, which felt worse than seeing someone. Being the only one aware of something strange in a neighborhood of 50 houses is unsettling. By mid-morning, I'd convinced myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was a hallucination from staring at the sky for too long. But then my neighbor's dog started barking, and I looked down the street. There was a man walking slowly toward the end of the cul-de-sac. Black suit, hands at his sides, nothing in his posture but calm, deliberate movement. No hat, no bag, no obvious reason to be there. I ducked behind the blinds. He walked slowly, steadily, keeping his head straight, never looking around. He passed the end of the street and disappeared into the side road without glancing back. I kept checking the street over the next couple of days. Sometimes late at night, I thought I'd see a shape in a dark sedan parked 2 or 3 houses away, but when I got close, nothing. The whole block looked normal. The only evidence of anything unusual was the memory of the light and that first car across the street. 2 days later, I was walking the dog around the neighborhood when I noticed a black sedan parked at the edge of the cul-de-sac. I stopped, pretending to tie my shoe. Same car, same dark, shiny exterior, same impossible neatness. The driver didn't blink as I glanced up. I swear for a moment his eyes were fixed straight at me, but impossible, because when I tried to wave, he didn't react. He just sat there, still, like a dark sculpture. I kept walking, trying to act normal, but I felt watched. Every turn I took seemed mirrored by the glint of headlights in a distance. The air felt heavier, tighter. I got home, locked the doors, checked all the windows. Nothing moved. The street was empty. And yet, the memory of the men in black sitting in that car, perfectly aligned with the curb, didn't leave me. Weeks later, I downloaded some software to see if I could recover the lost photos. Nothing. It was as though my phone had never recorded that night. I tried telling friends, but the way it came out, light in the sky, car across the street, 2 men in black, it sounded insane. They asked about weather balloons, satellites, drones. None of that explained the silence in the air, the way those men seemed to exist outside time, or the total erasure of the images from my devices. I never saw the car again after that week. Not the same one, not anywhere nearby. But sometimes when I'm up late with the porch light on and the street quiet, I think I see a dark shape at the corner of my vision. A silhouette too still, too clean, and I realize I'm holding my breath without knowing it. My camera sits on the shelf, memory card in. I don't touch it when I see that shape. It's as if the memory itself is fragile, and whatever was out there that night might come back if I try to capture it again. I went camping with my friend Laura up near Fort Mountain, Georgia, late last September. It was one of those last warm weekends before the cold started setting in, and we'd been talking about it for months. Just two friends, a cooler full of beer, and no cell service for a couple of days. We drove up Friday after work, set up camp before dark, and sat around the fire drinking cheap whiskey and talking about stupid stuff until the stars came out. It was after midnight when I saw it. I was sitting by the fire, tossing in sticks, and Laura was leaning back in her folding chair, staring at the sky. We'd been trying to spot satellites. She suddenly pointed above the tree line and said, "That one's too low." There was a light, white but not harsh, moving slowly across the sky. At first I thought it was a plane, but it wasn't blinking, and it wasn't flying straight. It would move in a line, stop completely, then dart sideways faster than anything I'd ever seen. No sound, nothing, just dead quiet. We both stood up. I remember the air going really still, like even the crickets stopped. Then, after maybe 20 seconds, the light flared green for a split second and shot straight up. Gone. We didn't sleep much after that. I remember Laura laughing nervously, saying she didn't want to get probed. I threw a rock at her for that one. We stayed up until the fire burned out, and I remember talking about how weird it was that it moved like it wasn't affected by gravity. Eventually, we crashed in our tents. That's all I thought it was, a weird but cool experience. 2 days later, I called Laura. I figured she'd probably looked up something online, or maybe found a local explanation. When she picked up, I said, "You still thinking about that light?" She asked, "What light?" I laughed, thinking she was messing with me. "Come on, Friday night? Over the trees? That weird thing that stopped midair?" She was quiet for a second, then said, "Dylan, I wasn't camping with you on Friday. I was at my parents' house all weekend." I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She told me she'd bailed on the trip earlier that week because of work. She even sent me a photo from that Friday of her and her mom at some diner. Same date, same time. I checked my own photos. I had a picture from the campsite, but she wasn't in it. Her chair was empty. I went through my phone gallery. Every picture I thought I'd taken of us that night only showed one chair, one sleeping bag, one beer bottle. I didn't understand. I could hear her voice in my head from that night. I could picture her laughing, the way she leaned her head back to look at the stars. I remember the sound of her opening a beer. I even remember her phone lighting up her face for a second when she checked the time. But she wasn't there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up trying to remember if I'd seen her get out of the car when we arrived, if I'd seen her set up her tent. I couldn't. It was like every memory that proved she'd actually been there just slipped through my fingers. 2 mornings later, I was driving to work down Highway 76. It's mostly empty that early, and the sky was still gray with fog. About halfway there, I noticed a black car in my rearview mirror. Looked like a Lincoln, or maybe a Chrysler. One of those big old sedans you don't see much anymore. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but every turn I took, it took two. I went through a drive-through coffee place and thought maybe I was imagining things, but when I pulled back out, it was still behind me. Perfect distance, not too close, not too far. I pulled into the lot behind my office, a small HVAC place on the edge of town, and the car pulled in too. I parked. So did they. That's when I realized there were 2 men in the front seat, both wearing black suits. It was already weird because no one around here dresses like that, especially not on a muggy Tuesday morning. The driver rolled down his window slowly. I was about to say something, maybe ask if they were lost, but he spoke first. "You weren't there either." That's all he said. His voice was even, like a statement of fact. I blinked, not sure if I'd heard him right. "What?" I said. He didn't repeat himself, just looked straight at me, eyes flat, face blank. The other guy didn't move, didn't even turn his head. They sat there for a second, then the window went up and the car backed out of the lot, smooth, steady, like a robot was driving. I stood there until they disappeared down the road. I didn't tell anyone at work. I didn't even tell Laura, though I wanted to. The weirdest part was how ordinary it looked. That car wasn't glowing or making weird noises. Those men looked human, just wrong in some quiet way I couldn't explain. That night I checked my dash cam. It records automatically when the car's on. The file from that morning was gone. Every other day was there, clear as ever. But that one was missing. Not corrupted, not blank, just missing from the timeline. I started doubting myself after that. Maybe I dreamed part of it. Maybe I mixed up days. Maybe Laura was right, and I'd been alone that night. But if I'd been alone, who was laughing next to me? Whose voice did I hear? About a week later, I drove past that same stretch of Highway 76 just before sunset. The sky was orange, and everything looked normal, until I saw that same black car parked off the shoulder, half hidden by trees. No one inside, no plates. I slowed down and pulled over about 20 yards ahead, trying to convince myself to just keep driving. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked back toward it. The engine wasn't running, but I could hear something faint inside, like a whisper or maybe static from a radio. The air around it felt charged, like standing near a live wire. I peered through the driver's window. The interior was spotless, too clean, and there was a folder on the passenger seat labeled Friday. I didn't open it. I just backed away, got in my truck, and left. The next morning, the car was gone. No tire tracks on the shoulder, no sign anyone had ever been there. I've tried to find that campsite again since, but the dirt road that led there doesn't look the same. I drove around for hours one weekend and couldn't find the same clearing. Couldn't even find the tree with the bent trunk where we'd tied the tarp. Laura stopped answering my texts after I asked about it again, said I was creeping her out. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I think about that green flash and the way her laugh sounded across the fire. And sometimes, in my mirror, I catch a glimpse of dark glass, headlights that keep perfect distance behind me, mile after mile until I pull over. Then they vanish, like they were never there. I don't tell anyone about it anymore. There's nothing to prove, nothing to show, just a few missing minutes, a friend who says she wasn't there, and a voice that told me I wasn't either. I was driving home from the deli shift. The road's all soft with that heavy, wet snow that comes in upstate New York when the storm's been going for hours. It was past midnight. The town was a string of dark porches, and the sodium lights along Route 9A turned the falling flakes into a steady, slow glare. I'd been on the road maybe 20 minutes when the headlights showed up behind me. There's always traffic this time of night. Plows, a few big rigs, but these lights didn't ease past or flash their beams like somebody impatient. They appeared in my mirror all at once, bright and steady, and settled into the lane behind me like they'd been waiting. I glanced over my shoulder. The car was a black sedan, windows dark enough that I couldn't see inside. It stayed a consistent distance back no matter how I changed speed. If I pulled to 40, it stayed maybe 4 car lengths back. If I dropped to 30, same spacing. It didn't try to pass. At first I figured the driver was tired or lost, so I kept my speed steady and watched. The snow muffled the road noise, your own tires, the occasional crack of a branch. The sedan's headlights looked hard in the mirror, 2 white coins that didn't scatter in the flakes. There was a small, stupid part of me that thought maybe the driver was one of the regular guys who work nights at the paper plant 2 towns over. They wear all black and they drive that kind of car. But when I looked, the driver didn't shift his gaze, didn't turn the wheel, didn't. This felt ridiculous when I say it out loud. Blink. I pulled off at the 24-hour Exxon near the junction, figuring if something was up I could wait and see. The station lot was mostly empty, a streak of tire tracks and a broken cigarette butt in the snow. The black sedan slowed behind me and stayed on the shoulder, headlights cutting straight through the falling flakes. I waited 15 minutes, nosed into a pump, killed the engine to warm up in the car. The sedan idled where it had stopped. No one came in, no one got out. The lights stayed on, steady. I tried to call Heather, my sister, because for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted someone else to know I was being followed. My phone registered 1 bar, then the screen glitched, and the call dropped. I blamed the weather and called the police non-emergency number, but the voice on the other end was the generic, "I will transfer you" click, and then nothing. The line went dead. By the time I dug the charger and had the heat on full, the sedan had pulled off and disappeared into the white. I felt like I'd been holding my breath the whole time, and when it left, the sound in the car felt too loud, Heater fans, the drip from thawing snow off the mirrors. I kept the radio low and eased back onto the highway. The sedan was waiting again further up. Same distance, same angle in the mirror. I tried one more thing. I exited onto Wyndham Road, took the back route that curls behind the old mill, and ought to throw off anybody just following the main line. My speed dropped under the glare of overhanging branches, the streetlights giving way to the darker, more familiar glow near the river. The sedan followed, and when a county plow rounded the bend, it nudged forward to the next lane with me, keeping that same measured gap. It didn't signal once. It didn't try to get around me. That's when I started to worry properly. Not because of the car being there, but because of that not blinking thing. I kept catching myself looking for ordinary movement. Steering corrections, the tired head tilt. But the silhouette was still like a photograph. My hands were white on the wheel and my stomach had that sour, cold, nervous feeling you get before you run a red light. There was a stretch of road near my house with 3 driveways close together, and I planned to use that cluster to lose whoever was behind me. I swung into the first driveway and waited a beat, then pulled out and rolled down the next. I used every little turn and side street I knew, doing that awkward, nervous thing you do when you think you can shake someone. The sedan mirrored me exactly. If I slowed, it slowed. If I turned left, it turned left. There were no tire squeals, no flashes of headlights, nothing to signal error or hurry. It was like being followed by the same calm that sits in your chest when your HVAC kicks on. When I finally eased onto my own road, Maple Street, the one with the tall elms and the one lone street lamp by the postbox, the black lights stayed behind me for a long, slow stretch. I could see my driveway up ahead, the path I'd shoveled that afternoon, and the little mound of salt on the curb. I pulled in and idled for a second, waiting, feeling ridiculous. The sedan slowed at the end of the road a little, and then, just like that, it was gone. One moment, 2 hard lights in the mirror, the next an empty trace of snow where there had been no tire tracks induced by leaving the shoulder. No engine noise, no drifting, no skid marks, nothing. I cut the engine and sat there with the heater fan ticking down, breath fogging in the cabin. Even the radio seemed to quiet in the sudden hush. I got out, tucked my keys into my pocket, and walked to the mailbox before going to the porch. The snow around the drive looked like it had all been waiting for me. No impressions beyond my own shovel marks and the faint ripple where my tires had compacted the path. There were no tracks from where the sedan had been parked on the shoulder, and there were no tracks leading away from the corner where it had waited. It was as if the lights had never been there. I locked the door behind me and fumbled with the bolt, because locking things felt like the only action left that might help. Inside, the house hummed with the refrigerator and the old pipes. I made tea and told myself to sleep it off, that I'd been tired, and the storm had made everything look stranger. I told myself the sedan driver had probably turned off on a side road, and I just hadn't seen the dust cloud yet. I didn't sleep well. I kept opening my eyes, thinking I heard the faint tick of car lights turning down the street, the way they sometimes slide like a second hand across a clock face. At 4 a.m., I opened the curtains and looked out. The street was empty. The lamp by the postbox threw a pale pool that the drifting flakes scattered through. Nothing moving. Nothing parked at the corner. For a while after that, I avoided driving that stretch at night. When I had to work the deli again, I drove a different way home, a loop that cost me 10 minutes, but let me see more intersections and more people. I told Heather, and she said it sounded like a creep in a rental, like the late-night TV shows. She told me to call the cops if it happened again. I wanted to believe that was enough. It wasn't. 2 nights later, I had the same feeling on my way home, an emptiness in the rear view that filled all at once with a pair of lights. This time I had the dash cam running because I'd started bringing it on habit in case I ever needed proof for an insurance claim or if there was a bad driver. The lights came on, settled behind me, and the camera logged it. The file's a still, steady recording of my taillights, the falling snow, and then 2 bright beams in the reflection. When I rewound the footage at home the next morning, the headlights were there, exactly where I remembered them, and when the camera's frame caught a glimpse of the driver through the low-resolution tint, there was a shape, but no moving features. The camera didn't capture anything like blinking. I slowed the frame down and watched the dark patch in the front seat the way people watch a coin tumble in a slot machine, waiting for a turn that never comes. Each frame was the same: a face, a hand on the wheel, like a paper cutout. I took the footage down to the station when the sheriff had a free minute between reports. He watched it on his desktop and his mouth opened and closed once without sound. He said we could file a report, sure, and then he asked if anything else had happened. I told him I'd had phone issues around those times, calls dropping, a dead spot on Route 9A where my bars vanish, but he didn't write that down.